Good morning. It's 3 minutes after 10 and, well, we knew it wouldn't be very satisfying, didn't we? Schadenfreude or whatever you want to call it. The slow realisation. I say slow. It's been a little bit quicker than perhaps I thought it would be. But the slow realisation that Brexit was a terrible mistake continues with one of its chief architects, whether you love him or loathe him, with one of its chief architects now admitting, in a rare outbreak of the truth, although it is inevitably caveated with multiple fibs and embellishments, admitting that it is a failure. I speak of Nigel Farage, possibly the first time he's ever been right about anything, when he describes Brexit as a failure. I don't quite know how to handle this topic. I mean, it's quite gratifying, of course, that he is no longer invited into every studio in the country, including this one, to have his tummy tickled by people whose job was to make sure that you knew what you needed to know before casting a vote in that 2016 referendum. But everywhere from the BBC to LBC to ITV to Question Time, he was allowed to spout his unbridled gibberish with almost no interruption or challenge. There were, of course, a few glorious exceptions. You can still see the best on YouTube. Gosh, I've aged. So how did we handle it on a day like today? It's a tragedy. It's a national tragedy. It's not a cause for celebration. There's no sort of high-fiving around the room or pointing out how right... Well, we may do a little bit of pointing out how right we were. There's certainly no I told you so involved, because that would involve a degree of smugness. You can't be smug about the fact that you've correctly predicted an arson attack on your own house. There's no smugness in watching the smouldering ruins of your own home being described as smouldering ruins by one of the people that set fire to it, while claiming, of course, that it was going to be somehow transformed into a magical palace full of unicorns and unspecified freedoms. It's actually enraging to see somebody so blithely admit what everybody paying attention, who wasn't either blinded by racism or so in danger of disappearing up their own fundament that they'd lost sight of the sun, has known all along. Of course it's a disaster, but nevertheless this was quite a moment on Newsnight last night when Victoria Derbyshire did what people should have been doing years ago. Admittedly, you can do it now with facts and forecasts instead of with just explanations and evidence, but better late than never.
Brexit question. 53% of people say it was wrong to Brexit. That was a poll last month. Around 1 in 5 Leave voters regret it. The OBR forecasts a 4% hit to the economy over the medium to long term.
Don't make me laugh on
Hang
that.
on, that's 40 billion in tax revenues.
Comical.
The UK economy is the only G7 economy not back to its pre-pandemic size. Business investment has lagged behind comparable economies. Economically, the UK would have been better staying in, wouldn't it?
I don't think that for a moment. But what I do think...
Based on all that?
But what I do think is we haven't actually benefited from Brexit economically when we could have done. I mean, what Brexit's proved, I'm afraid, is that our politicians are about as useless as the commissioners in Brussels were. We've mismanaged this totally. And if you look at simple things such as takeovers, such as corporation tax, we are driving business away from our country. Arguably, now we're back in control, we're regulating our own businesses even more than they were as EU members. Brexit has failed.
For you then?
Well, I wouldn't rule it out. It's not top of my bucket list, but frankly, we've not delivered on borders, we've not delivered on Brexit. The Tories have let us down very, very badly.
It's never his fault, is it? Never his fault. It's never any of their fault. He's a heckler. I told you this some years ago. He's a heckler. Should never have been allowed anywhere near the stage. Leave him at the back of the room lobbing rotten tomatoes at the people who actually have to get on with the business of doing business. Absolutely pathetic. And even there, you see one of the trademarks of the man's grift. The OBR, you may not remember, was set up by George Osborne so that government would have independent financial advice. It's not infallible. No forecaster is. Just ask Michael Fish. But it is independent financial advice. It removed financial forecast from Treasury control after Gordon Brown's chancellorship. So it was a conservative invention designed to deliver independence to financial forecasting. All budgets, every budget is built upon OBR forecasts, except, of course, Kwasi Kwarteng's. You remember what happened to him and his mini budget. So even there, Farage is still grifting, still doing, let's not listen to the OBR. So the OBR is biased, the IMF is biased, the OECD is biased, the Office of National Statistics is biased. In fact, the only person who understands anything correctly is Nigel Farage, who's been wrong about everything. Brexit has failed. Come here a minute. Did you fall for it? More crucially, did you fall for him? Because if it was the racism that appealed to you, how are you processing the fact that some of the right-wing think tanks are predicting immigration hitting 1 million in the next couple of years? If it was the racism you fell for, how are you processing the fact that a Tory Home Secretary, after 13 years, is trying to use it as a hobby horse to drive herself to the top of her own party? If it was the racism that you fell for, how the hell do you account for the fact that immigration is higher now than it was before you cast your vote for racist reasons? Or did you fall for something else? Did you fall for him? Did you fall for Farage? Why? 0345 6060973 is the number that you need. And I'm sure that my memory is not deceiving me, but didn't he once say this?
If Brexit is a disaster, I will go and live abroad. I'll go and live somewhere else.
Oh, well, I'm happy on this occasion to contribute to that fund, actually. I'm happy to chip in a few quid. We could get the tin, Keith, the I told you so tin. That must have a few quid in it by now. Does it count as a charity, getting Farage out of the country? It's a shame, of course, that we're not in the European Union anymore, because then there'd be 27 countries to which he could move more or less freely. As it is, I suppose if Donald Trump became president of America again, he might be able to find a berth for himself there. But I mean it. How do we talk about something like this today? Because it is both important and unimportant. Someone so pitifully wrong about everything, being demonstrated to be wrong about everything, is not in and of itself news. It's a little bit dog bites man, isn't it? And yet, even people who saw through Farage from the very start have to acknowledge that he played a very big part in getting Brexit over the line. Without the votes that he delivered, it probably wouldn't have happened, even with Boris Johnson's opportunistic shtick. And remember, Johnson thought they were going to lose, and that would put him in a better position to become leader of the Conservative Party than backing victory. It put him up against George Osborne when David Cameron stepped down, and he would have all of the right-wing Brexiters of the party foursquare behind him. Of course, when he became Prime Minister, he got rid of everybody else, which is why we're in such a mess now with headbangers and loonies all over the cabinet, competing, frankly, it would seem, for Headbanger of the Year award. So one of the key architects, if not the key architect of Brexit, has described it as a failure. If you voted for it, who do you blame? 0345 6060973. I'd love to dedicate the programme just to you today. I really would. I probably won't be able to, because it takes a long time. Obviously, it's stages of grief, I suppose, to recognise what has happened. But I probably won't be able to. So we will have to probably spend some time asking people on the right side of history, what the hell happened to our country? How was somebody so despicable permitted to wield such influence? He was on Question Time more often than David Dimbleby, it often seemed. He was like he had a season ticket for it. How many members of the European Parliament from the Labour Party can you remember seeing on Question Time? Or the Conservative Party, actually people who understood how it worked and wanted to be part of it. This idea that the public discourse is served by putting up people who are provocative and divisive, fact-free and devoid of evidence, somehow increases the public understanding of an issue, is absolutely heartbreaking. And that's why today there is no celebration. There is no happiness. There's no, what would you call it? I mean, there's vindication and validation, but it's pointless, really. There's no pleasure in it because we always knew it was going to happen. You sit here and say, oh, James, you must feel great. You've been proved right about everything. Well, no, I don't. I feel rubbish because I knew I was going to be proved right about everything. It wasn't even debatable. And now this claim that we should be removing regulations. The reason why we obey regulations that have been in place for years is so that we can carry on selling stuff into markets that have regulations. You remove all the regulations, where are you going to sell it? Who are you going to sell it to? It's just such epic ignorance, such breathtaking boneheadedness that now dedicates itself, or is now dedicated to, pretending that it could have gone better. Oh, there is a good Brexit, but it goes to a different school. It's absolutely pathetic. It's a national shame, and I don't know where it ends. Labour not ready yet to really grasp the nettle. Tories, I would say, still a leader and a half away from being able to admit the truth. Or Kemi Badenoch, of all people, seems to be moving towards that position with her recognition of reality regarding this ludicrous bill that Jacob Rees-Mogg wanted to get through Parliament, abolish all EU laws. Do you know what that is? That's legislation as racism. It's actually incredible when you dig into it, what that is all about. It's saying, I don't care what a law is. I don't care how good a law is. I don't care how effective a law is. I don't care how helpful a law is. I don't care how beneficial a law is. I don't care how good a law is. If it was passed into law while we were members of the European Union, and it's a law that other European Union countries also abide by, then we must get rid of it. I'm not sure that everybody fully understands the idiocy of this position, this rationale. Do you remember Martin Luther King's speech about character, about caring more about the content of someone's character than the colour of their skin? Right? Now imagine that's a law, and you care more about what it says on the tin, if you like, or where the law came from than you do about what the law does or what the law says. Is that a good law? Well, did we pass it while we were in the European Union along with all our other fellow members? Yes, we did. No, but then it's a bad law. But Jacob, don't you need to know what the law is before you decide whether it's a good law or not? No, I just need to see the colour of the law's skin. If it's a foreign law, then it's a bad law. OK, but some of these laws were Margaret Thatcher's idea. Yeah, but they're still foreign. That's what it is. And they're still inflating that balloon. They're still tooting on that trumpet, that idea that you can have bad law based on where it came from instead of what it does, what it addresses or what it achieves. And there it is, Nigel Farage now saying that Brexit has failed. I don't want beef today, although if you serve me beef, I will chew it. But I don't want beef today. I want regret. And I don't want apologies. I want remorse. And I don't have blame. I have forgiveness. Because I have said from the start, contempt for the conmen. And there was no bigger conman than Nigel Farage. Compassion for the conned. It's in danger of sounding patronising. It's in danger of sounding condescending. But it's not. It's how I was raised. It's compassion. And if you got mugged, I feel sorry for you. If you got bamboozled, I feel sorry for you. If you've had your bank account rinsed by a scam artist, I feel sorry for you. If you've had your vote stolen by a liar, I feel sorry for you. There comes a point where my sympathy expires. And that point is close now. Because if it wasn't clear to you then that you were putting your trust in someone utterly undeserving of it, then it has to be clear to you now. Because he's admitting it's a failure, as it was bound to be, and he's trying to blame it on other people, as he was bound to do, and he's dismissing expertise and evidence, as he has always done, and he's treating you like a mug, which is what his entire life has been built upon. So here is Nigel Farage, somebody who, thankfully, we don't have to spend a lot of time talking about or worrying about anymore, admitting that his life's work has been an abject failure, pretending that it is somehow the fault of other people as opposed to the fault of cold, hard reality. And your ability to cling on to the carcass of what he sold you should, by rights, be disappearing as I speak. Shouldn't it? Because if he's disowned it, what are you left with? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. You have two choices. You either abandon ship and join the rest of us in the lifeboats, or you continue to believe the lies. You continue to pretend or genuinely believe that it is somehow the fault of the people charged with implementing Brexit that has gone badly. And if you're in that second category, again, I don't necessarily want beef with you, although I'm not sure you qualify as compassion for the conned anymore. I do wonder. I do wonder how you lie straight in bed at night, actually. But because I get it. I get the desperation, especially if you had so much invested in it emotionally. You've fallen out with friends and family. You spent that night and a year afterwards drinking Remainer tears and laughing at people who understand things and feeling like finally the tyranny of the boneheaded was upon us and you were going to be king. I get that. I understand how heady that must have been, how intoxicating that must have been. But look around. Just look around. Look at what you've done. And think how kind it is. of anybody to say that we don't actually blame you, we blame the people who conned you. So if you're still signing up for the con, if you're still pretending that it could have gone differently, that it could somehow have been Brave New World, that it could somehow have been unicorns for everybody and jam tomorrow, you're still doing that, then we are in danger, or you are in danger of losing my lifeline of compassion, because I don't get that anymore. How much proof would you need? Not only everything from tomato rationing in British supermarkets to Nigel blooming Farage describing it as a failure. What would it take for you to say, if not sorry, then at least whoops? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. John, I disagree, mate. It's not Idiot's Corner by any stretch of the imagination, but you say Schadenfreude is the only game in town. Enjoy it. You can't enjoy it. I got teenage kids. I look around at the opportunities that they've been denied. I look around at the economic damage they will probably be seeking to repair in years to come. I look around at the damage to our international reputation. Everywhere you look, you see the consequences of treating Nigel Farage like an honest broker, like a serious actor, like a decent man. There it is. Wherever you turn, you see the consequences of it. Kids can't study abroad anymore, anywhere like as easily as they used to. People with homes that they saved and scrimped and spent their lives looking forward to living in come retirement can't do it unless they make profound changes to their existence. Everywhere you go, everywhere you look. And yet here he is. Oh, it's a failure. I may make a comeback. I'm fine. I've got a TV show. Told you that would. I told you they'd be fine. Nothing will touch them. They'll be absolutely fine. They'll all be fine. Every single one of them. Rocco Forte yesterday. Yeah, I might emigrate to Italy. It's awful in the European Union. That's why I backed Brexit and gave £100,000 to the Conservative Party. But the way things are going in this country, I might emigrate to Italy. It's awful in the European Union, but I might emigrate to Italy. Rocco Forte, what an absolute clown. And they're everywhere. Everywhere you turn, these people. They're not going to be touched by it. Rishi Sunak, he's got what, £700 million to fall back on? You think he's going to struggle with the cost of living? Jeez. See, there's no Schadenfreude. There's no joy in this. I've got to go. They're pointing at their clock. I don't want to. I've barely started. I could talk uninterrupted for an hour. Farage calls it a failure. They should get him back in every single studio he ever appeared in, shouldn't they? Every single newspaper he ever wrote articles for. Farage calls Brexit a failure. 0345 6060 973. 24 minutes after 10. Okay, that probably was a bit long, that introduction. I could start again now. It's not even fire. Don't shake your head like that. This is what put us on the map, this stuff. But it's not even fire in my belly. It's like a weird, I don't know, what is it? It's like an unspooling. It's like, I think Farage calling it a failure feels like a moment, actually. For those of us who have been paying far more attention to this national disaster than is healthy, Farage calling it a failure, albeit with his characteristic lies and embellishments and nonsenses. Farage calling it a failure won't bother him a bit. He won't have lost any sleep last night. Oh, Brexit is a failure. Never mind, I'm okay. Farage calling it a failure has to be a moment. And it is, among other things, a moment to ask, how do you feel about falling for it now? Neil's in Peterborough. Neil, what would you like to say?
Yeah, good morning, James. Thanks for having me on. I listened to your show quite a bit. I'm very nervous.
Don't be. It's only me. Nice, easy topic like Brexit, Neil. What could possibly go wrong?
I feel ashamed of myself because I voted to leave. I bought into what he was saying. I bought into all the saving all this billions for the NHS, etc., etc. I thought, well, it sounds too good to be true, but I didn't look into any of the substance. I didn't look into any of it really. I just thought, yeah, this sounds great.
And even if you did, they'd be there whispering in your ear that it was all Project Fear and there was nothing to worry about and everything would be fine.
Absolutely, yeah. And it was just, I feel completely ashamed by it. I feel embarrassed. I feel embarrassed for the country, how we look to the rest of Europe and the rest of the world. It's just a complete farce. And if I could go back, I'll re-vote again, and I'd vote to stay.
Well, you're far from alone. I don't like the word ashamed. It can be a toxic burden to carry, and the effort put into persuading you to do what you did was immense. It was off the absolute charts. It was also law breaking, of course, although that got glossed over as well. Do you not have any scintilla of hope that there might be some truth in the idea that there is a good Brexit, it just goes to a different school?
Well, not particularly. No, I don't. I just think it was all a complete farce. I think it was some big boys wanted to line their own pockets. Someone doing it for his own projection into politics, who went completely quiet and silent after it finished and hid himself away. I just think it was complete. Yeah, I'm just embarrassed by it all.
Well,
okay. It's just a shambles.
Well, once it's out, better out than in, Neil. And now you can start the process of giving yourself a break, because if anyone should be go on.
He says things like, immigration, getting rid of immigration and stopping the borders and stuff like that. But it's just completely apparent now that how much we need immigration because of job vacancies and everything else like that. I mean, in my industry, in the construction industry, you've just seen how sometimes labour is really hard to find because there's no one there to do it.
Well, I hear you. And the exemptions that are being given in various sectors are so huge now that Suella Braverman can point at immigration figures and claim that it's a problem, whereas in fact they are sticking plasters over the wounds that her and her fellow Brexiters helped to inflict upon us. Neil, thank you, mate. It's never easy to admit that you're wrong. I should know. I wrote a whole book about it. 27 minutes after 10 is the time, but I didn't have the excuse of millions of pounds and some of the most powerful people in the country, not to mention the loudest voices, all telling me to jump in the wrong direction when I've jumped in the wrong direction in my life. I don't have that excuse, and it's not even an excuse, it's an explanation. 0345 60 973 is the number you need if you just want to talk to me as a so-called Brexiter, or even as a Brexiteer, if you still want to use that ludicrous language. How do you feel about the man Farage calling it a failure? 0345 60 973. James is in Sheffield. James, what would you like to say?
Very similar to your last caller. However, more than feeling ashamed, I feel really angry.
Go on.
I don't consider myself a mug.
Right.
And I like to look into things and try and get a balanced look at everything. So when the debate was going on, I was saying to your producer or your researcher there, when I watch, for example, Question Time or listen to Radio 4, it was always put across as we've got an expert that's all for Brexit and we've got one who's against. And it felt like a fairly balanced argument that they were putting forward.
It did.
So when I was listening to this, and then again, when there's things going on around your own life, for example, I was living in Lincolnshire at the time.
Yeah.
And the guys that used to come in and pick all the vegetables, and it had really been dominated by all the immigration coming in, So there was little signs that I wonder if these people are right. So when you start looking at this balanced argument, as you see it, and then see the bits that you're living through as well, you start to buy into it, plus a desperation for change as well.
Yes, of
course.
You like. Yeah.
Coming after the austerity bit.
Yeah.
So
oddly, giving a kicking in a way to David Cameron, I think, was part of the motivation for some people. So it got sold as so many different things to so many different people, didn't it?
It did. It really did. And I fell for it completely. And it was, I was saying to you, and the question that you asked about when did I start to see, I think that was the reason why I fell for it.
I don't think I have asked that question yet, but I was about to.
Oh, apologies.
No, you read my mind. I was about to say, when did the cracks start appearing, James?
As soon as so obviously before COVID and stuff. So when the reports started coming in of shortages in medicine,
right,
problems at Dover, all the things that obviously the Brexiters had been saying wouldn't happen.
Yeah,
totally covered. You start to think, ooh, hang on a minute, I'm sure they're laying this out. They've got this. They've talked about it enough.
Sure.
And then from that point on, it's just been a really nice big rolling moss of and complete lies.
And there's so much in the rearview mirror. I can't, off the top of my head, I've got Operation Mincemeat stuck in my brain because it's a new show in the West End. But the government's own assessments, the government's own impact assessments, Operation something, completely ignored. Johnson just stuck them in the fridge. The government's own impact assessments, the chance you had to get ready for the impacts was completely fluffed because they wouldn't admit that there were going to be any negative impacts. It's banana republic stuff, James, isn't it?
It is, but and also such a lack of trust in Osborne and Cameron. I think you're bang right to point that out, because at that point I had them down as quite corrupt anyway.
Fair enough. Well, I mean, I'm looking into some of the stuff that came up in Leveson about the links between Cameron and Rupert Murdoch's organisation, and even what little hair I've got left has started falling out, James. And this is all in plain sight. This is all out there. None of it's revelatory, but I don't think most of us clocked it at the time. As I said to the last fella, I think you've put it really well, and I hope that you feel a sense of exoneration as well, because you're right. You could turn on Newsnight, and I know because I was presenting it shortly after Brexit, not before, and we were still compelled, for reasons I never fully understood, to treat two sides as being equal. So you would have someone there saying the earth is flat, and we would ask them the same number of questions and give them the same amount of attention and imbue them with the same levels of authority as the person sitting on the other side of the sofa saying that, actually, no, I think you'll find that the earth is not flat. It's largely spherical. And we had to treat them the same. So how could you not? I mean, how could you not come away from that thinking, oh, it's a bit of a coin toss, right? It's a bit this way or the other. And therefore you cast your vote without proper consideration.
Well, it really was. She was like, well, what do you mean when you say it was balanced and that? What could have happened?
Yeah.
To have stopped that? And it was basically, I thought, something you said a while back about the fact that if there was 100 economists, 99 were saying it was a terrible idea, and one was saying it was great, but they were only putting one of each on.
Yeah.
Now, if somebody had said, we've had real trouble tracking somebody down to defend this, but here we are. We've got one out of all these.
Patrick Mimford is available. Patrick Mimford is available. That's what it would be. Mateless said this as well. Emily on News Agents, of course, has made this point repeatedly, who presented a lot more BBC programmes than I ever will. And that idea that you'd sit in a studio, happened here at LBC, it's possibly worse here, to be honest with you, where you would sit in the production studio watching colleagues, trying to find economists to come and say that Brexit would be a good idea. And every economist in the country was saying it was going to be a bad idea, except two or three, maximum. It's a bloke called Halligan, I think, as well. So the Minford and a bloke called Halligan. Hey, what the hell is that about? Imagine any other. I mean, look, there's a slim chance, right, that chicken licking is right and the world is falling in. But if you've got 99 people saying it's an acorn that's landed on your hat, pet, the chances are it's an acorn. But here you go. Here's some geezer called Halligan and Patrick flipping Minford to tell you why, economically speaking, Brexit's actually going to be a brilliant idea, and all the experts with proper jobs and high academic accolades, they're all wrong and I'm right. Oh, and up next, Nigel Farage. Here's Thomas Watts with your headline. It is 10:37, Rich in Pembroke to the top of the class. There are so many references from Blackadder that you forget some of them. But do you remember Captain Rum in the second series, played by Tom Baker? He was a sort of mad old sailor, and I think Rich remembers rightly when he says, Captain Rum said, when asked about the necessity of a crew, he replied, opinion is divided. All the other captains say a crew is necessary. I say it isn't. And that really was what our last caller was referring to with coverage of Brexit, certainly the economic impacts on the BBC and indeed everywhere else. We found Captain Rum. He's called Patrick Mimford or Halligan. They'll sit here and tell you everything's going to be great. Or Hannan pretended to be an economist, didn't he, for a while? They all pretended to be economists for a while in those sort of debates. They had to, because you couldn't find any real economists to debate the actual economists about economics. Captain Rum saying, opinion is divided. All the other captains say a crew is necessary. I say it isn't. Cheap shoes for peasants. So what happened to you? How did you fall for it? And also, I say, who do you blame? It's a bit lazy. You can stop texting me Yellowhammer now. Yes, Operation Yellowhammer was the government's own reasonable worst case planning assumptions as of the 2nd of August 2019. So the Prime Minister of these islands, Boris Johnson, took expert, impartial advice on reasonable worst case planning assumptions and set fire to them. In the same way he set fire to Alexander Allen's report into Priti Patel's bullying, in the same way he set fire to the House of Lords Appointments Commission recommendations on Evgeny Lebedev, who went into the House of Lords, and on Peter Cruddas, who went into the House of Lords. The same way that he set fire to anything he didn't want to read, anything that he didn't like, Boris Johnson set fire to it. And the flames spread. So there we are. So who do you blame as someone who conned you? 0345 6060 But for the rest of us who weren't conned, who do you blame? I mean, Farage is a figurehead. Johnson is a figurehead. I've got some personal issues with people that I'd known for a very long time who turned out to be talking complete gibberish, but they didn't realise it and I didn't realise it. But every MP, really, what is the job of a Member of Parliament, if not to do the stuff we're too busy doing our own jobs to do, i.e. to understand things? I always remember Nadine Dorries asking colleagues on a WhatsApp group to tell her what the customs union was because she kept losing arguments about why we had to leave the customs union. You'd think that even Nadine Dorries at that point in time would go, hang on, I should probably find out what the facts are before reaching my opinion about whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. But no. And she's, of course, now a Daily Mail columnist. So there's no punishment for these people who are being proved daily wrong about the single biggest domestic decision that this country will take in generations. It's quite incredible. Who do you blame? Who do you hold responsible if you didn't fall for the con? I'm looking at that question because the answer's pretty uncomfortable, isn't it? It's still almost all of the current cabinet, almost all of the current print media, almost every columnist or commentator you can name. They all told you it would be a great idea, which is why I mean it when I say to people, don't beat yourself up. Don't feel shame. It's a miracle it was so close in 2016. And I reject this as well from Al, who's in Sunderland. Don't keep on with this contempt for the conmen crap, James. People were fully warned in 2016 what would happen, and they still went for it. You reap what you sow. Absolutely zero compassion for anyone who voted it. I will disagree with you, happily. I will agree to disagree with you on that, because Daily Mail, Daily Express, The Sun, at this place, I was like a sore thumb on the schedule at LBC back in 2016. That's how much I would stick out by simply explaining to you what Brexit was about. Big personnel changes, of course, here, but there's still a couple knocking about who told you it was going to be a brilliant idea. Very quiet about it now, as you'd expect. Probably start banging on about NHS translators soon. That seems to be the direction of traffic that Suella Braverman is trying to encourage. So what do you look at and think, that's the person I shouldn't have trusted? And if you didn't fall for it, who do you think did the most damage? Monty's in Diss in Norfolk. Monty, what would you like to say?
James, good morning.
Hello, mate.
I think your callers and your viewers has really struck a nerve with me, and I voted to leave. I was in my early 20s when we took the Brexit vote, and I think I got caught up in this mob mentality. I wasn't heavily involved in politics, but this idea of leaving and making Britain great. I'm fiercely patriotic. I love my country.
Yes.
I love Great Britain, and I felt like we had two options back then as a naive 22-year-old, and we stayed the course and we carried on in the direction we were going. Or we had these charismatic, different politicians such as Johnson and Farage that were, painting this picture of a New England or a New Britain. Without much thought, I threw my vote into the leave bucket.
It was a heady brew that they were serving up, wasn't it?
It was.
Monty? I say that with full agreement. I really do. I get it. I completely get it. And if you describe yourself as being young and not that engaged, it was probably even headier. Yeah,
I think so. And I think it's a really interesting point and makes me particularly cautious of Labour's stance on lowering the voting age to 16, because I think when you're in that early stage of your life, you are impressionable. And
you are, but of course the massive majority of people in that age group didn't fall for it. So it would be a little unfair on all of the people who didn't fall for the heady brew to be punished for your failure to see the facts.
No, absolutely, and I do appreciate that. I'll take that one on the chin. But for me,
Norfolk was a bit of a hotbed, wasn't it? As well, I remember I was around there a lot at the time, and you couldn't drive more than 5 miles without seeing at least 10 signs in farmers' fields encouraging you to vote for Brexit. I don't know where that came from, because the land is held by a relatively small number of people in Norfolk. So, but the farming community there, despite the NFU trying to remain more or less neutral, they were pretty four square behind it, weren't they?
It was absolutely everywhere.
Yes,
it was on the signs, but it was in your social media as well. I'm in a generation that's heavily reliant on social media, and the algorithms would push certain views your way, and you only had to read a couple of articles, and then suddenly you were only reading articles that were either backing Brexit or fiercely opposing it.
Yeah. And if it was fiercely opposing it, you had this magic card you could play when saying that is Project Fear. So don't be a coward. Don't fall for the crowd. And that's why you mentioned patriotism, because it appealed to a sort of, a pioneer spirit. We will move forward and build a new Jerusalem, and that was a heady brew. It was all rollicks, of course, but it was a heady brew. It was a heady brew. Can I ask when the cracks started appearing for you? If you noticed, you may not even have noticed. It's like boiling a frog.
More recently, as I've become more engaged, but even immediately after, as Cameron resigned, and suddenly all of these well-respected politicians that were against it, were leaving, and the likes of Farage, just disappeared away, and these voices that you were listening to and engaging with suddenly weren't there, and it felt like we were then left, people that didn't even really support the vote were left to try and make this thing happen.
That's a very astute observation. That's why Theresa May, rightly or wrongly, will I think be judged quite positively by the history books, because she had this incredible double horse to ride of trying to actually deliver it, mitigate the damage, while being held hostage by the newspapers and the colleagues who wouldn't allow her to admit that there was going to be any damage at all. That's a fascinating it's a brief period in the history of these islands, but it's an absolutely fascinating and pivotal one. The problem, of course, was that character, what's his name, Nick Timothy, encouraged her to go down the leave the single market and the customs union route. And, inevitably, he's been rewarded with a column in the Daily Telegraph, and Nadine Dorries gets a column in the Daily Mail. So if you think the relationship between right-wing media owners and the damage that's been done to the country, largely as a consequence of the heady brew they served up and people like Monty swallowed, just have a look at what's happening to the foot soldiers. Are they getting rewarded? It'd be a bit sad not to get a seat in the House of Lords and just to get a column in the Daily Telegraph, but some people have got both, like David Frost. 10 minutes to 11 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. As one of the key architects of Brexit, something which some people used to think was an accolade, not that long ago it would be something presumably that Nigel Farage was proud of. Well, he's now admitting that Brexit is a failure. Many of us knew that it would be, although derived no pleasure whatsoever from seeing those understandings come to fruition. But if you're in the group of people that believed him or believed some of his fellow travellers, then how do you feel today, now that he's disowning it? Not completely, of course. There is a good Brexit, but it goes to a different school, which is a neat summation of about 80% of the comment pieces written by the Daily Telegraph, published in the Daily Telegraph at the moment. This is just so that you don't... TLDR, do you know what that means? What the kids say, too long didn't read, or too long don't read. So the TLDR, or the Daily Telegraph's opinion pages, there's a brilliant Brexit, but it goes to a different school. Farage's version of it is usually, I may have been beaten by a dolphin in a by-election, but if I was in charge, everything would have gone brilliantly. Just because I've been shown to have understood absolutely nothing up to this point doesn't mean I wouldn't be the best person to take charge moving forward. And if you're not persuaded by that, here's some racism to distract you. And what a heady brew that has been. It looks like Suella Braverman is taking over as the landlady in the Farage Arms. 10:52 is the time. So what happened to you? Jeff's in Southport. Jeff, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, to explain to you, I voted for Brexit. Not that I've ever believed it was a good idea.
Quite rare in your neck of the woods.
Pardon?
Quite a bit rarer in your neck of the woods than in other parts of the country.
Yeah, because, I'm a socialist through and through.
Right.
Always have been, always will be. And I was watching the destruction that David Cameron was doing through austerity.
Yes.
I was watching libraries closing, Shaw stopping, the old folk council homes all closing, all things that would never come back.
Yes.
And I felt like a kid being bullied in school.
Yeah.
And there's 6 bullies around me. And I know I can hit one, but I'm going to take a pasting for it. So I voted for Brexit in the vain hope it would get rid of Cameron, which it did.
It did.
And that made me happy for 5 minutes. but I knew it would be wrong. I knew it would be a disaster. But I was so enraged with the Conservatives, and in particular David Cameron.
I think that's possibly the position I find it easiest to imagine myself falling into, out of all the reasons that there were for doing it. I was never going to fall for the xenophobia or the economic illiteracy, but the idea of giving Cameron a kick in the teeth. The problem was, I knew it'd be Johnson.
So I didn't.
No.
I didn't realise that. I wasn't thinking that far ahead. I mean, where I live, if I painted my dog blue, it'd probably get elected. And
And there it is. So, you say 5 minutes. How long were those 5 minutes really?
I would say within the first 12 months, definitely probably 6.
Because, that was it, wasn't it? In many ways, what you did was particularly daft because the mess that came about as a consequence of that vote meant that even if there had been someone in Downing Street who was keen to undo the damage you've described, this Alexis Sale put it best, didn't he? The idea that the 2008 global financial crisis was caused by there being too many libraries in Wolverhampton, so Cameron and Osborne come along and spend 5 years shutting them down and cutting spending on the areas of the country that needed it most. And then even if by some miracle of transformation Theresa May had been dedicated to undoing some of that damage, unlikely given that she was Home Secretary under David Cameron, she couldn't have done because she was so taken up. There was so much to deal with as a consequence of the vote that you cast.
Exactly.
So you shot yourself in both feet there, Jeff.
I know. I freely admit it. I know what I did.
Yeah, and I understand why.
Like you say, it was like going into a fight with 6 fellas, you were going to lose, but at least you'd slap one of them.
You'd take a swing at one of them and go down fighting at 10:55. Can't argue with that. Joe's in Islington. Joe, what would you like to say?
Morning, James.
Hello.
I've after listening to Nigel Farage clip earlier on that you played, I feel absolutely destroyed because it was him and his people that persuaded me. I listened to them, stupidly listened to them and their arguments, and I actually fell for it. So, like your previous callers, it's totally embarrassing. But I wanted to get rid of Cameron, and I thought that would do the trick. But like I was saying to your producer, as we was walking up to vote, my wife was saying, she was going to vote the same way I was voting because I'm her husband. And I said, well, no, you shouldn't be doing that. You should be voting the way you want to go. And she wanted to remain. Right. And even though she works with the NHS, she wanted to remain. And I was almost forcing her to vote the way she wanted to vote because she was adamant she was going to vote to leave. Right. She was going to follow you. Is that because she thought maybe you understood? She wrongly thought you maybe understood things better than she did. That's exactly it, James. Okay. That's exactly it. And even as we got up to the booth to vote and we went our separate ways, she said, "What shall I vote?" I said, "Look, vote what you want to vote, please. Yeah. Don't listen to what I'm saying. Think what's on your mind and do it." Right. And do you know what, James? Even as I was putting my pen to the paper, I was thinking, why am I so forceful for my wife to do the right thing? Yeah. Am I doing that because I actually want to remain? Like your conscience? It was your conscience or something? I was saying I'm trying my best to persuade her to cancel out your vote, really? Yes, and I think I was actually trying to persuade myself to remain, and I didn't. Obviously, I pressed the wrong button. Yeah. And as I was leaving the place, I said, I've done the wrong thing. So that's how quick it was for me. That was before the result came in, because I remember taking quite a lot of calls immediately afterwards from people saying they voted for it, but they didn't think it was actually going to happen. But you didn't even wait for the. No, I knew the minute. As I came out, I was going, no, damn, I've done the wrong thing, I suppose if you used the word intoxicating when we were talking to Monty in Norfolk, it's a bit. Well, you sound hungover now. That you sound like you took the intoxicating brew, and you're dealing with the hangover pretty much before you got out of the voting booth. Absolutely, taking a lot of stick from the wife as well. Yeah, well, that'll teach you. Thank you, Joe. It's important conversations like this are friendly. Some people are a bit cross with me. Some people from my side of the argument are a bit cross with me for being for having friendly conversations. But listen, we really are all in this together, and the sooner we all get our shoulders to the wheel of trying to get things back or trying to improve what has happened or trying to undo damage, then the sooner it will be achieved. There is no point. You sound like a Jeremy Corbyn fan trying to relitigate the 2019 election. You have to be kind to people. And of course, the big difference is that you Jeremy Corbyn fan is never going to apologise to all the people who predicted what was going to happen as a consequence of his
tenure at the top of the Labour Party. I said all along, Corbyn fans and Brexit fans are identical. The crucial difference, of course, is that Brexit fans can't pretend anymore that their project could have worked. They can do, it's a great idea, but it goes to a different school, but the evidence of its failure is all around us. The other lot, who are just as strange in many ways, they can claim for the rest of their lives that it wasn't their fault, everything went wrong, it was all the fault of the people who said that it was all going to go horribly wrong. It's coming up to 11 o'clock, you're listening, because I'd put him on the list as well of people who are responsible for the scale of the mess. The absolute failure to challenge and stand up is, something that should be on the consciences of many people for many, many years to come. It is 3 minutes after 11. I'm torn on this weird meeting of cranks and crypto-fascists that has got quite a lot of headlines today, because they're all such weirdos. I mean, should you really shine a light on them? But if the Home Secretary turns up, then, well, it's tricky, isn't it, to completely ignore it. We may do an hour after 12 on what Suella Braverman is up to at the moment, but I can tell you two contributors to this National Conservative. One has said that you must have the guts to use your own name on Twitter. And she currently tweets as Miss Snuffy, which may be her real name. I don't know, but it seems unlikely. And another contributor has described Nazism as Germany mucking up nationalism. There was nothing wrong with nationalism in Britain. It's just that there was something wrong with nationalism in Germany. This is a Spectator writer, inevitably, called Douglas Murray. I don't see why no one should be allowed to love their country because the Germans mucked up twice in a century. Anybody? I mean, what is that? Is that just because the Germans made a mess of Nazism, we should be able to have a go at it? I don't know. But using the phrase "muck up" to describe the Holocaust is, even for one of Andrew Neil's little helpers, that's quite a remarkable contribution to public discourse. So I'm once again in that position of wondering, should we talk about these people and give them the oxygen and the attention that they so blatantly crave, or should we treat them with the contempt that they deserve? I don't know. And there are echoes of Brexit there, aren't there? Because if we treated Farage with the contempt that he so obviously deserved from the start, it's highly likely we wouldn't have done it. So lots of people still waiting to contribute, but I'm going to switch it now. I'm going to flick it to the question of, who do you hold most responsible, even though you voted against it? So even though you voted to remain, because I do think it's a moment. Some of you suggesting it isn't, not many of you, but, you know, Farage started with the betrayal narrative pretty much the morning after Brexit. I don't think he meant it. I don't remember him doing it. He was too busy marching around the room pretending to be, I don't know, Father Christmas, wasn't he? So the actual admission that it is a failure, albeit with the utterly predictable lie that it could somehow have gone better if only someone else had been in charge. There is a good Brexit, but it goes to a different school. Here's the question. As someone who voted Remain, I'm tempted to continue with people who voted Leave, but we should mix it up a little bit. As someone who voted to Remain, who do you think was most responsible? I reminded you of Jeremy Corbyn's culpability there just before the break, because if the opposition had one job during that period, it was just to get the facts out there. If you were leader of the opposition in the immediate aftermath of Brexit, and of course in the run-up to it, don't forget, he didn't come in after the Brexit vote, he came in after the 2015 general election. Just the facts, both before and after, somebody, ideally the leader of the opposition, should have been pointing out all of the stuff that our callers have been pointing out today. Should have been saying it's outrageous that the BBC is booking economists as if there is a division of opinion on this, as if it's 50-50 or even 52-48. It's not. It's 99-1. It's a bloke called Patrick Minford and then pretty much every other economist in the country. Why do you think it was the same five faces that were turning up all the time? Daniel Hannan. What's the name of the other clown? Moylan. Daniel Moylan, one of Johnson's buddies in City Hall. Another one they're all in the House of Lords now. If you're ever stuck to find one of the idiots that caused Brexit, just go and hang around outside the House of Lords for about 5 minutes. Kate Hoey's there? Good God. Sheesh. Couldn't make it up. Moylan and Hannan, they're sort of Tweedledum and Tweedledummer of right-wing politics in the United Kingdom. I don't think Forte got in there, did he? His dad did. His dad was a brilliant hotelier. But little Rocco, he's the one that's thinking of emigrating to Italy now because everything's so awful in the European Union. These geniuses. So if you voted to remain, who do you blame the most? If you haven't picked up on this already, a lot of this is actually research for my new book. And I should probably tell you at some point the 10 people who merit a chapter heading in the book. So the book is called How They Broke Britain. It's finally coming along. It's finally coming together. Do you know what I had to do? I had to stop following the news. I had to stop updating it because I was never going to finish the introduction. Introduction got up to 15,000 words. It was supposed to be 5. It got up to 15,000 words because people kept doing things like resigning from the chairmanship of the BBC after it turned out that you'd helped arrange a loan for Boris Johnson, or resigning as deputy leader of the Conservative Party after turning out that you were a massive bully and you'd lied about it. All of these events kept unfolding, so I had to stop. I had to stop writing the introduction. Claire Fox in the House of Lords as well. You couldn't make it up, could you? Went in at the same time as Charles Moore, or Baron Moore of Etchingham, as he calls himself. He's the fella who was behind the plan to get Owen Paterson off the hook after he broke the parliamentary rules. This is what the book's about, by the way. It's like it's showing you all the links between all of these people. And you know what I'm like. I'm such a blabbermouth that I want to keep telling you the stuff I've stumbled across. I want to keep saying, did you know that 2 years after coming out of prison, I can't though, because otherwise you won't buy the book. But listen, I'll tell you something, and I'll tell you now. I do this for a living. You've noticed that, I think. I do this for a living. I'm not planning to publish any revelations in my next book. It's out in November, How They Broke Britain. I think you can pre-order it. I'm not planning to publish any revelations. The more people who pre-order it, the more likely I am to finish it, because the logistics of having to send back the advance would be too epic to contemplate. I do this for a living. And I would say at the moment, if I put in a 3-4 hour shift, every 20 minutes I am stumbling across something that makes me retch. And it's all out there. It's already in the public eye. I keep saying it, and I do this for a living. It's my job to follow this stuff. It's my job to follow this stuff. And every 20 minutes I stumble across something, a link, a story I'd forgotten, something I didn't notice at the time, and the 10 people who merit a chapter heading each. I wonder if I should invite you to guess who they are. Quite a lot of them have had a mention today, actually. So David Cameron, he gets one. Boris Johnson, he gets one. Nigel Farage, of course, who has sponsored today's programme by admitting that Brexit is a failure. He gets one. I don't know if you can work out who else might get one. I'll tell you soon, sooner rather than later, I think, but possibly not today. So if you voted against it, who do you think, looking back, as Farage admits it was a failure, you, like me, feel no sense of joy at this, as I've said, and I will continue to say. It's a bit like pointing out that someone was about to set fire to your house and then being invited to do a dance of celebration when your house has been burnt to the ground by the person you said was going to set fire to your house. Who for you was the chief arsonist? Who was the arsonist in chief from the other side of the debate? So from the people who fell for it side of the debate, it's quite a crowded field, actually. It's the same field for people on the Remain side of the debate, but possibly we will come at it from a slightly different perspective. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Sandy can have a go first on the texts. I absolutely agree that Corbyn was responsible for the Remain campaign failure. As a member of the Labour Party, he failed me by refusing the mandate to Remain. He did nothing to refute the lies of the Leave campaign. Starmer is doing the right thing by tiptoeing around the EU subject. People do not want to be told they are wrong. Well, today's a day. Farage admitting it's a failure. First time my phones have exploded on this. That's why we did the whole hour on people accounting for the vote they regret. Usually we get a few of those, and we punctuate these conversations with people who we will talk to now from the other side of the debate. But it is changing. That to me, this is a bit of an oil tanker moment, whether it's because of Farage or whether it's just because of the accumulation of evidence. I do not know. But Starmer will have to reflect that at some point. But I for the record, I agree with you. I don't think he needs to reflect it yet. Keir Starmer is carrying a Ming vase across an ice rink at the moment. And there have been a couple of wobbles, but current vase status stable. Phil's in Newark. Phil, what do you think happened?
I'm a bit nervous, James. So
it's only me.
With me.
It's only me, Phil.
I've heard you say that a million times. Very reassuring.
Good.
So two sections of society, really. I blame the media and the output that they have given. But secondly, and I suppose that this is the bigger one, is the people that did it, the people that voted. We'd just gone through a period of unparalleled growth in the UK, and how people can put two and two together and realise that was down to the European Union, I just don't know.
2008, remember? Hang on, 2008 pulled the rug from under the growth a bit. There were a lot, didn't it? So you did have the financial crisis kicking in.
But everybody else did as well.
Yeah, that's true.
In Europe.
Yeah.
So for them to then vote to leave the European Union, what did they want? How much better did they think it was going to get? So yeah, I point the finger at the people that actually voted to leave.
Well, Patrick Minford told them that food would be 8% cheaper by now. Jacob Rees-Mogg told them that. So I can answer your question. What did people think they were going to get? They thought they were going to get cheaper food. Jacob Rees-Mogg told them. Cheaper shoes. He told them they were going to get cheaper shoes and cheaper food. I don't know how big a swing shoes were in the vote.
Doesn't that indicate a certain degree of naivety on people's part? I mean, you can wish for things, but, people have got to realise that things don't just get pulled out of thin air.
Well, okay. I'm going to enjoy this hour, possibly even more than the last one, because I get to be the devil's advocate, don't I? So two things occur to me, right? Let's just take Rees-Mogg and Johnson, yeah?
Yep.
Let's leave Farage out of it for now. Who else are we going to put on that list? Hanan, he was popping up on the telly all the time. These are very, very plausible people.
And you've said it before, and the reason that they were plausible is because of the tone of their voice and their accent.
Yes. And how do you explain this without patronising people that do judge people differently according to their accent? Up to a point, Phil, I think we're probably all a little bit guilty of that, of judging a book by its cover when it comes to presentation.
I would fall into that box as well.
I tell you, I was looking at Martin Lewis's first appearances on the telly back when Money Saving Expert was founded 20 years ago, and he's doing it from his living room. And he's put his suit on, and I just wanted to give him a cuddle because you're doing it from your living room. But he understood even then, if I'm going to do this, I've got to look like the real deal. So there's evidence of judging a book by its cover from the right side of history, if you like. So Martin, knowing, putting on his River Island suit and doing his tie up, he looked the business when he was doing it. Now he could buy River Island several times over, but we do all do it. So I do have some sympathy for people who think that because Jacob Rees-Mogg is a poorly educated person's idea of what a highly educated person looks like, they trusted him. That's the word we need to focus on. Trust, because putting your trust in someone is an honourable thing to do. It's the person you've put it in who becomes dishonourable.
Yeah.
Not the truster, the trustee, as it were. So, all right, I'll give you the voters and the media, of course. I mean, again, how could you think it could be so wrong when it's on the front page of almost every newspaper in the country that it's all going to go brilliantly?
Yeah, I just think it was naive on those people's part that voted that way.
I'm not going to argue with you on the naivety of it, but I am going to argue with you on the sort of susceptibility of it. You take a newspaper all your life. It's never got anything horribly wrong before, unless you, of course, read The Sun and you're thinking of Hillsborough. But you just that's fine. And anyway, I don't like the lefties and the Daily Mail. It's got great puzzles at the weekend. They're not going to print absolute bilge on their front page. And then lo and behold, they did. Oh, Paul Dacre gets a chapter in the new book as well, of course. 11:16 is the time. 19 minutes after 11 is the time, and a question of if even Farage is calling it a failure, who can possibly claim that it's a success? Answer at the moment, even in Idiot's Corner, nobody. Maybe I'm getting too many texts today. And now we turn our attention to the question of people who voted to remain. Who do you hold most responsible for the national disaster that we're currently enduring? For me, James, it was the BBC. They're supposed to be the arbiters of the truth, and they weren't. So there was nowhere for people who were in two minds to go to get the truth. I think you're absolutely right. And the real nail in the coffin of that credibility question was when Paul Dacre, the then editor of the Daily Mail, the one responsible for that hat trick of truly, truly despicable front pages. The Enemies of the People, which was an attack upon the independence of the judiciary. The Crush the Saboteurs, which was an attack upon parliamentary democracy itself. and our Remainer universities, which was an attack upon academic freedom. That fellow who interrupted Rees-Mogg yesterday, wanting to point out some of the well-established and widely accepted hallmarks of fascism that many believe the current government, particularly the Suella Braverman wing of the current government, are demonstrating. I would have quite liked to hear what he had to say, because it's not necessarily a very recent development, but there it is. The media side of it being absolutely key. And the BBC sort of, it's an Overton window issue. If the newspapers have moved so far in one direction, then unless the BBC is in very, very strong hands, then the BBC will move in the same direction a bit. So the middle moves. The BBC should have stayed put, should have said it. I'm joined now by one of the countless economists who think Brexit is going to be an appalling idea, and Patrick Minford. You're one of the two people we have in our contacts book who can be accurately described as an economist, and you think it's all going to go brilliantly. That's what they should have done, but they didn't. 21 minutes after 11 is the time. Mark's in Reading. Mark, what do you reckon?
Hi, James.
Hello.
I think, whilst there's obviously a lot of people to choose from, for me, it would be David Cameron.
And he's popping up a lot, you know. Possibly he could be in the lead at the moment, and that's from Remainers, not from Leavers. Go on.
Yeah. Okay, the first reason, and this was crystallised for me by that fantastic caller you had from Liverpool, by saying that the reason a lot of people...
Southport, just so I don't get into trouble carry on.
Okay, why a lot of people were desperate for something different and to give a kicking to the people in charge, as either he or you put it, was because of the choices that Cameron and Osborne made when they came into government and what happened to the country because of austerity. So that was number one for me. The other reason was that I don't think he had to call the referendum. I know there's a sort of a version of events that says he had no choice because of the attack from UKIP.
He'd lost a couple of MPs, hadn't he? There's a couple you should put on the list. Douglas Carswell. And what was the other fella?
I can't remember. But there were two that went to UKIP, weren't there?
Mark Reckless. Reckless.
There you go. How perfect.
How ironic.
And I think it was actually quite cowardly that he did that. I think it was all about shoring up his leadership for at least another term. And he thought, possibly a bit naively as well, he thought, if I just give them this referendum, they'll shut up. And look how that's, how disastrous that's proven. And then the final one is that in him then more or less leading the Remain campaign, lots of people couldn't take him seriously because he'd spent a lot of his time in office kind of running the EU down anyway. And saying, not as forcibly as Farage would, but really saying that the EU would be better off outside the EU. And then he's trying to convince people that, no, actually we should stay.
That never quite landed, did it? Because it was always a little bit mealy-mouthed or a little bit half-hearted, which again is a crime of ignorance. Because he should have had a grasp, or at least a better grasp, of the difference that membership had made.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know, because he's obviously is an intelligent person, I don't know whether he did but felt he couldn't make the argument that strongly for his own, reasons in terms of keeping aspects of the party happy, or if he genuinely didn't appreciate them. And I doubt we'll ever know, will we?
Well, I don't know. I think he's written his memoirs already, hasn't it? Just no one read them. Maybe it's in there. We could have to check. We could check the index. But that idea, that I think that's quite a big theme actually that we haven't explored. This notion that it felt to lots of decent people, it felt like a coin toss. One of our earlier callers picked up on this. Because of the environment, you felt that, it can't be... whichever way I go, it's not going to make that much difference. So I'm going to go with my feelings rather than necessarily with those experts that Michael Gove is telling me to ignore, because the consequences can't be that high. And I think, oddly, some of the most ardent Brexiteers, to use that ridiculous phrase, I don't think they understood the scale of the consequences either. They couldn't quite, when they would say things like they need us more than we need them, or David Davis would say, of course they'll give us deals, they'll be queuing up all the German car companies. They couldn't quite conceive of us being, if we were a third country, we wouldn't be a third country like every other third country. We'd be a very special red, white and blue third country.
English exceptionalism, which I think runs through lots of aspects of British life and issues that we have.
Yeah, there's a reason for it, The empire, if it's not quite in living memory, then it's still very much casting a shadow over history curriculums and over the fevered dreams of a certain type of commentator and columnist. That notion that we're just the same as every other country that once had an empire, whether you're talking about Portugal and Spain or, I don't know, Genghis Khan. No, we're not. No, we're not. We're special. And that's why we have to control what people can see in national trust properties in case they begin to realise that maybe we're not. 11:25 is the time, which leads us actually to Suella Braverman's incredible comments yesterday, which I don't fully understand. I may ask you to explain them to me. Suella Braverman saying white people should not feel guilty. About what? Collective guilt over their historical role in slavery. It's a very strange sort of impulse up there with the national trust stuff. I'd like to know all about the role of British people in slavery. I'd like to know how many fortunes were built on it. I'd like to know how many of our institutions wouldn't exist today if it wasn't for it. But the idea of feeling personal guilt or collective guilt, she's talking gibberish, isn't she? Very odd thing to do. 26 after 11. Rich is in Sheffield. Rich, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Good morning. Thanks for having me on.
You're very welcome.
Kind of following on from your last caller, actually, in some ways. I personally blame Cameron most. I mean, we know there's a whole rogues gallery responsible for the Brexit disaster.
Yeah, but this
Cameron was a...
Go on, sorry. No, I'm interrupting before you've even got your before you got your spikes on. Go on, you carry on.
But I'd say I personally blame Cameron most of all. He was the man at the top at the time and the leader of the Conservative Party. We know that this issue was tearing the Tories apart for decades, ever since Maastricht in '92. I mean, you remember what was his name, Jimmy Goldsmith and the referendum party, and all that jazz, precursors to UKIP. So they've been around for decades. But I personally feel that he got lucky with the election in 2010 with the hung parliament and then getting the Lib Dems into bed with the Conservative Party.
Yes.
He then was kind of forced into the Scottish referendum in 2014. He got lucky with that. Again, that was 55-45 there. I feel that he then mistook himself for being an operator in the same way as Tony Blair and thought that he could probably wing it through.
He did. I remember saying that election 2010 was great but this is the sweetest one of all or something like that. He thought he was superpowered, didn't he, after that one?
Exactly. And completely failing to recognise that Tony Blair put the hard work and the groundwork in to get the results that he did. And thought he could wing it with the 2016 referendum, which of course he couldn't. And he unbelievably, I think, he allowed the opposition to set the terms of the referendum, as in such a blank, open question: do you believe we should stay or go? Certainly, if you're the one granting it, you should be the one setting the terms.
I tell you what, I'm uncomfortable with David Cameron taking such a kicking because he's only chapter 8 in the book. So so I may have to move him. Actually, it's not in order. It's not in order of culpability. But I'm uncomfortable with it, not because it's not true, but because there's a premise attached to it that I think is hard to justify, which would be that there never should have been any referendum at all.
I see where you're coming from with that. But I mean, my own view, I've thought for a long time, is that whatever else you think about, say, Margaret Thatcher or Tony Blair, can you imagine them allowing the tail to wag the dog in the way that the European Research Group wagged the Tory party?
No, but
for 10 years?
That was linked to majorities, wasn't it, and fears of defections.
Well, it was,
and I mean, why they were so frightened of defections? I forget what the majority was in that period, but you wouldn't. I mean, I guess they were getting information that maybe a lot were going to lose. The point is, Rich, where we agree, if you're going to call a referendum, you throw everything at winning it.
Yeah, exactly.
So he probably shouldn't have called it. It was cowardly to call it, or at the very least, it was very self-interested to call it. And Cameron couldn't throw everything at winning the referendum because that would have involved throwing a lot of stuff at Nigel Farage, who, of course, was picking Tory supporters off the extreme right wing of the Tory party all along.
Of course. I mean, I don't particularly agree with him, but I remember Peter Hitchens saying at the time something along the lines of Cameron had a choice between saving the UK or the Tory party, so he chose to save the Tory party.
I don't know if he said that in the context of Brexit, did he?
It was in the context of Brexit. It was in the context of the referendum.
Okay.
It was something along those lines. I'd need to look up the quote.
No, I'm happy to take your word for it. I just think I can't remember, actually. I stopped reading the poor chap's columns years ago. Rich, thank you. It is 11:30. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Thomas Watts is here with your headlines. It's amazing, really. I think the dam has broken. Quite what it will mean for British politics, goodness only knows. But you can see the right wing moving further to the right with various conferences full of very strange people saying very, very, very unpleasant things, up to and including the current Home Secretary, Suella Braverman. I guess the question will be the same as it was in the run-up to the Brexit referendum. Will the middle move as well? Will the BBC start reporting these people as if they are fair-minded individuals or serious characters? In the case of the Home Secretary, it'd be hard for them not to. But anyway, that's not what we're talking about today. We're talking today about who's most responsible. On the day that Nigel Farage calls Brexit a failure, those of us that knew it would be are wondering who we hold most responsible. Farage is barely getting a look in, actually, which is odd, given how many Leavers hold him responsible for it. But this is not a scientific survey, is it? So the sooner we crack on with it, the better. Carol is in Bromley. Carol, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, Carol.
So I voted not to leave.
Yes.
And by that I mean I was neither a Remainer nor a Brexiteer.
Okay.
My vote was because I didn't feel like there was any information from the government or the Leave Party about what the actual post-Brexit world would look like.
Yes.
So there wasn't any information that said, for example, I worked in the financial services sector pre-Brexit.
Right.
And so I knew, being in the financial services sector, that the basis of London being the centre of the European financial services system was because we were part of the EU.
Yes.
And that as soon as we left the EU, that would have grave consequences for our sector. So in my mind, there should have been somebody who was sitting, in the economics team, in the government, figuring out how do we retain our position as the center of, the financial world if we are out of the EU, and what.
So they should have been preparing for defeat in the referendum.
Exactly. That's my view. Is that there should have been, the government should have had, whether it's a document, a manifesto, something, or force the Leave campaign to put together something that showed.
I don't know how they could have done that. And the problem was that the Leave campaign just shouted Project Fear at everything. Mark Carney was pretty clear, wasn't he? The governor of the Bank of England was pretty clear about what he thought should happen. I haven't thought of it like this before, and it's a really interesting suggestion that I tell you what, if the government had been preparing for defeat in the referendum, it would have helped Leave, even whatever their findings were, because it would have been almost as if they were contemplating it, therefore it can't be that bad. No?
Well, that's just a question of marketing and PR, right?
Yes,
if you phrase it as they're preparing for defeat, then that's what it looks like. But if you phrase it as this is the apocalypse of what a post-Brexit.
But they did do that. They may not have done that before. They didn't do that before the referendum, but they did it afterwards. They called it Operation Yellowhammer, and Boris Johnson burnt it.
Yeah, but it was too late by then.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for me,
here's the problem. This is the thing that's niggling me. I love this idea. It's really got my grey cells whirring. But who would enough people have trusted? Because you've got Farage. Gove, remember, has said stop trusting experts from organisations with acronymous names.
Yes.
Farage would call everybody. He's still doing it today. He was doing it last night. It was the Office of Budget Responsibility. Apparently has a poorer grasp of economics than Nigel Farage, who, I don't know, wouldn't know one end of a calculator from another. But hey-ho, the man's a genius in his own mind. So who could who could have had that, because the government was a Remainer government, remember? So they'd automatically get tarnished as Remainers or whatever they came out with by way of forecast. The governor of the Bank of England was tarnished. He still is. They attacked the IMF, they attacked the OBR, they attacked the OECD, they attacked the Office of National Statistics. What is this mythical, august institution that could have offered up objective analysis that wouldn't have been torn apart by all the liars we spent the first hour talking about today?
Could I throw the Queen in there? Maybe she is like an independent party. I mean, you've listed all of the bodies that if I were thinking about, I'd be like, maybe the Office of Budget Responsibility. Exactly. So maybe the Queen.
I think you're a genius. I think oddly, and I think it would have been uniquely the Queen, because I don't think if God forbid King Charles had been on the throne earlier,
no, exactly.
I don't think he could have got away with it. So the Queen had, if she'd done a royal commission, I know that it's not the Queen that calls royal commissions, it's the government, but who could possibly have transcended the propaganda war and the abusive response of Farage and Johnson and their mates to anything that was factual or evidence-based? Her Majesty the Queen could have done it.
Yeah. There we go. We solved it.
Well, there it is. Good Lord. It's like an episode
but...
of Doctor Who, this. It's just 7 years too late. So you could... Thank you, Carol. That's what you needed. You needed somebody. You needed a trusted... And it should have actually been the BBC, of course. But the BBC couldn't do it because they had to put liars on air, you know. They'd only just come off the back of a period of treating Nigel Lawson like an expert on climate change. So, you know, the idea of treating his son like an expert on the economy would have been perfectly feasible to them. He's got several newspaper columns. He must know what he's talking about. So the BBC should have done it, but how could they? Who else in this country could have actually taken up the role of impartial analyst of competing arguments? The Palace. Carol is a genius. John's in Islington. John, what would you like to say?
Hello, good morning, James.
Hello, John.
Thank you for holding the flame in such a fashion for so long. It's such a welcome.
Well, thank you for, providing me with gloves.
Yeah, I was kind of relatively active in the Leave campaign when it all happened, and I got increasingly infuriated by Campaign HQ. Well, there were several.
Do you mean the Remain campaign?
Yeah.
Sorry, that's
did I say Leave?
You did. That was quite an important thing for me to correct. I'm always trying to interrupt less.
I'm glad you picked me up on that one.
It might make a difference to what follows.
It might indeed.
Carry on.
No,
John.
they were incredibly lazy. Yeah. I found that just with 3 or 4 days on sort of the internet, there was a particularly good website by Yorkshire MEP, which just gave you facts. And in 3 or 4 days, you found you had a lot more facts to levy in any argument with virtually anybody on the BBC, the telly, or in public debate. And I kept pleading to allow people, normal people, not bigging myself up, but such as me, to get on the radio to say things as people do on your show, rather than politicians who are too lazy to actually muster arguments. Yeah. Or experts who were too, again, lazy to muster arguments. I blame... The other thing we forget is dear old Jimmy Goldsmith back in the when.
So second mention of him today. He started the referendum party and used significant parts of his enormous fortune to sort of get this debate into the spotlight, didn't he?
I think it's $1 billion or more he gave. I don't know. But, I mean... The Hannons of this world had been essentially mustering their little army for 25 years. They were far better prepared for the argument, or the false argument, than the Remain.
And people never thought they'd have to have it. I always think of Sir Paul Nurse, who's a Nobel Prize-winning scientist.
No, I know.
I know you know. I'm mentioning it for everybody else listening. At the... Because I did all my work on this after the referendum, sadly. I often wonder well, we didn't have enough listeners at the time, but we do now. If it all happened again now, we might actually make some sort of meaningful difference. But I remember almost realising while I was listening to him that these people, you know, asking a Nobel Prize-winning scientist to argue about what's going to happen to science with Nadine Dorries or Kate Hoey, they don't have the skill set for that. It would be, you know, it'd be like asking Gary Kasparov to play chess with a pigeon. It just doesn't. They don't have the. Why would he need to explain to anybody why a Nobel Prize-winning scientist knows more about science than Nadine Dorries does? You see, that was part of the problem. And Stuart Rose.
I also blame Jeremy Corbyn because it's quite obvious he did his level best to do nothing and, in fact, to damage the Labour Party. It was led by Alan Johnson, the Labour Party, Remain campaign.
He was.
He actually told me that Corbyn had been extremely uncooperative. And was, if not torpedoing, doing his level best not to do anything.
He was a leaver. He was a leaver who didn't have the integrity to say so, really. I mean, it's that simple. I know people like to canonise him. Not many, but still a few in your neck of the woods. But
it's going to be interesting round here.
It is going to be interesting round your way. We shall watch. We shall watch that with interest. But just the idea of just saying I'm a leaver, and that means I can't lead the Labour Party at the moment, or it means we've got to have some sort of election because I cannot lead the opposition to Brexit. But instead, he tried to have his cake and eat it, and lost 2 general elections.
The Remain had no real emotional appeal. And there were so many easy ways of doing it. We sat about thinking, well, what if you got some old hero from the Second World War sitting with his grandkids talking about how he fought for Europe and stuff. I mean, there were lots of ways in which you could have
got a bit emotional. Just got a bit emotional. Appealed to some of the impulses.
Patriotic, and European all at the same time. And
Churchill, Churchill. You could have reanimated Winston Churchill. He would have been a Remainer. He certainly, and now they're attacking one of his proudest legacies in the European Convention on Human Rights. I'm just chuckling because I need to apologise to Tom who just spat his tea out. I know, but the thought of Gary Kasparov playing chess with a pigeon. John's dead right, And there was a bloke called Stuart Rose. I wonder how many people in a pub quiz would know the name of the man who was the head of the Remain campaign in the 2016 Brexit referendum. Pub quiz? Oh, I've told you the answer now, so I'm not going to play the game. But how many people would know that? And, who could it have been? Who I wonder, can't have the Queen, because she could have been the impartial arbiter, the overseer, if you like, a palace commission, a sort of... But my goodness me, who could have been a decent leader? So many have emerged since. Who would you give it to? Gary Lineker? Hugh Grant? I don't know. I mean, who would have been the sort of absolute maypole around which many people could have danced? I don't know. 11:46. Oh, shush, no. I was far too busy. It's 11:46. It is 10 to 12. David Cameron, that's taken me by surprise, I must be honest. I mean, it's not unanimous, but among Remainers, Cameron is by some distance in the lead on who do you blame for this almighty mess. I don't, actually, but I'm going to possibly review my position on the grounds that I don't know that... Well, I suppose they'd put off... Why would they have to have a referendum? Someone should have just bearded Farage, really. They should. I mean, without being immodest, I did show them how to do it. You can still see that on YouTube. But the failure of Conservative politicians to take him on, maybe it's because they were conscious of how many of their core support actually quite like the stuff about talking foreign on trains and living next door to Romanians. Because that's all he really did. Those were not even dog whistles, really. But lots of Cameron. Another one here. I put the blame squarely on the shoulders of David Cameron, who brought the vote to the public purely for party unity. 2 texts that are really interesting. Good morning, James. Thank you to you and to your listeners for helping me to understand how I could have been so gullible and voted for Brexit. I like to think I have learned a lot since then and have very different opinions now. That's from Jill, who's in Farnborough. And then this one's unsigned, which is, I've not had many today. I used to get quite a lot, but here's one. You lost. Please don't get over it. Revel in your pain. And you just sort of think, well, first of all, you think, pardon? And then you sort of think, what pain are you talking about? I mean, this idea that somehow a life can be so diminished and empty that the discomfort of people who understand things brings you joy. It actually, it doesn't pain me to see text like that. It breaks my heart, actually. I can't imagine what your life would be like. Even now, your hero Farage has called it a failure, but you still think it's worth celebrating because people like me continue to describe the disaster that we're all inhabiting. And I'm 90% certain I'm a lot better insulated from this than you are. which makes me feel even sorrier for you. So it's the strangest sort of projection, really, isn't it? To think that somehow doing something stupid... It's a bit like shooting your own toe off and then revelling in the discomfort of the people feeling sorry for you. Ha-ha! Well, you should shoot another toe off. That'll really teach us. Oh, God, they are, aren't they? That's the European Court of Human Rights. Let's break something else. That'll really teach them. This notion that... I mean, listen, those of us who are part of the metropolitan liberal elite, I mean, we have a nice life. I grant you that. But we still have problems. We still have to deal with stuff. We still have arguments and still have bills to pay. And we still... I promise you, there's not some brilliant party that you haven't been invited to. You listen to people like Farage and also that fellow who wrote the book recently about how me and Carol Vorderman are secretly in charge of the world. They seem to think there's an amazing party that they haven't been invited to. He was whining about not being invited to book festivals lately. The guests at book festivals are invited according to how many tickets the organisers think that they'd sell off the back of people wanting to come and see you. So if people don't want to come and see you, it's because there's something about you that is repellent to book festival attendees. It's not some grand conspiracy. I just find it really sad now. You lost. Please don't get over it. Revel in your pain. I will. I mean, not revel in it. I'll describe what you've done, but be a bit more like Jill in Farnborough, who has the wit to realise that understanding things is the best way to stop being defined by pain and prejudice. Alan is in Nottingham. Alan, who are you putting on the list?
Hello, James. I would put Jeremy Corbyn number one,
yes.
And I would put him very, very, very close behind him, rather. I will put every single Remain-leaning MP, which was probably about 550 of them, that voted to enact Article 50. Because, in my view, they went completely and utterly against the idea of them being representatives rather than delegates. I'd love to sort of exhume Sir Edmund Burke just to see what he'd think about it all.
Yeah. What just remind us of the significance of that moment.
Her Majesty's, it was then Her Majesty, obviously, Her Majesty's opposition, isn't it really their job to oppose? And given that a lot of the opposition did vote to enact Article 50, which was the legal mechanism of starting the negotiations to leave
Well, it set
the
the
Union.
It set the clock running as well, didn't it? That was the point. So, the idea of getting your ducks in a row, you still had people like David Davis on side claiming that the German car industry was going to give us some sort of free pass and just to get that. Yeah, I mean, why did Theresa May do it? It was 498 votes to 114. So SNP, Plaid Cymru, the Liberal Democrats opposed the bill.
I joined the Lib Dems on the back of Brexit, and particularly the vote to enact Article 50.
47 Labour MPs did the right thing. Ken Clarke was among the Tories who rebelled. There weren't many of them. But
I've not got those figures, but that's really interesting to quote back at them now. Thank you.
Yeah, isn't it? Because, I mean, how many of them just followed? I mean, I have some sympathy for the whip. That's how parliamentary democracy works. The Labour leadership supported it. They didn't have to go along with it, but yeah, I think you're right, actually. Cameron at the top, Corbyn at the top, and then the Labour MPs that didn't rebel on the Article 50 vote not far behind him.
And the real tragedy, of course, is it was a voluntary referendum. It was not legally binding. Had it been legally binding, then it would have had to be rerun because both Vote Leave campaigns broke electoral law.
Yeah, I mean, I think that ship sailed. I think you'd have struggled in the atmosphere of Brexit to get that ship afloat, to get that ship back into port. But you are technically correct. And that brings us back to the media, actually, Alan. Imagine if 80% of the media had been either impartial or pro-Remain, then the unbinding nature of the referendum and the criminality, the illegality that you referenced would have got a much bigger boost. It would have received a lot more coverage, wouldn't it? Thank you, Alan. 11:57 is the time. I'm just looking at the list of Labour MPs who rebelled. It's quite an interesting one, actually. Some didn't vote, and some didn't. Oh no, I tell a lie. Ken Clarke was the only Tory who voted against it. There were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 who didn't vote at all. But and that may have been paired. But the Labour MPs, just sort of looking through those names, you've got Clive Lewis is there, Dawn Butler, Ruth Cadbury. That's my MP. Very interesting. That. Thank you. Peter is in Oxford. Probably be the last word on this. Or possibly not, though. Big appetite to talk about it. I wonder why. Peter, who do you blame?
Hello again, James. I agree with you. You're big four. And they're Cameron, Corbyn, Johnson. And I don't even want to say the F word on your August station.
No.
But they're the four without whom it couldn't have happened. Each of them was a necessary, not sufficient precondition for Brexit. And for different
what was
reasons.
that phrase? Necessary but not sufficient.
Exactly. But
I'm having that.
I mean, I agree entirely with Alan just now. I think the other people who are behind it, I mean, obviously leaving aside the relative minnows like Daniel Hannan, the intellectual face of Brexit, as he was called at the time, believe it or not.
Yes, you're right.
But leaving them aside, I think the other people culpable were those who pretended from day one that the referendum was binding. I'm sure you were there at about 6 in the morning on the 24th of June when I think it was Dimbleby said, we're out.
Yes.
Now, that was completely wrong. What he should have said is a non-binding referendum has now found.
I don't know that I agree with you because Cameron had said we will abide by the decision that
he had no right to say that, and I mean that's not democracy.
He may have had no right to say it, but he'd said it by that point. So Dimbleby wasn't at fault when he said what he said.
Well, be that as it may, I mean, I think it could have been made much clearer what the nature of the decision was. And as Alan just said, the courts found that there had been bad practice, but they couldn't act because the referendum was non-binding. So I think, and also, of course, it didn't mandate leaving the single market or customs union. That was never on the ballot paper.
No, that's on Nick Timothy, whose name whose name we have mentioned today. But guess whose name we haven't mentioned?
Tell us, Theresa May? No. You mentioned her.
No, mentioned her. Carry on.
We've
got half a minute.
Oh, gosh, you got me there.
Dominic Cummings.
Sorry? Cummings?
Cummings.
Well, yeah, I mean, this Bengali behind the whole thing, and who has now repented, hasn't he?
He's not repented of Brexit. He's repented of putting Boris Johnson into Downing Street. So I just mentioned that because I'm looking at the list of people who get chapters, get their name at the top of chapters in the book that I'm working on. Cameron, Corbyn, Johnson and Farage, obviously, and then Cummings as well, actually, but no one has mentioned him. It's 12 noon. It is 3 minutes after 12. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Whew, that was good. I enjoyed that. It's not like the good old days, is it? There was a very different energy in the room when we were dealing with people who were still persuaded that Brexit was going to be brilliant. Now that we're dealing with people who either have had to face the facts that it isn't or who knew all along that it wouldn't be. The energy is very, very different. There were 3 periods, I think. There was a post-referendum, I'm thinking now. Hardly anyone really listened to this programme before the referendum. I suppose that's a Brexit benefit. But there were 3 periods. There was the period where, I'm talking about where I'm coming from now, the period where we thought possibly, if you could just get the fact out there, we might be able to stop it from happening. That was the people's vote or the second referendum or measure twice, cut once, something that, of course, Jacob Rees-Mogg, with characteristic dishonesty, disowned after the referendum, but that was very much his position before it. And then there was the period that I feel is possibly coming, it bleeds into the third period. That was the period of, okay, it's happening. We better wait and see how bad it is. Hope against hope that it's not quite as bad as we thought it was going to be. But the prospect of, I think, Johnson winning in 2019 was the end of the road, really, for any chance of sticking the brakes on or measuring twice, cutting once. And now I think we're quite clearly into the third period, albeit that it intersects with the second period, and that is the period of either regret or, I don't know what the word is to describe people who, and listen, I'm not talking about everybody. I fully appreciate Billy Bunch of Numbers. You still think it's a brilliant idea and you feast on those Remainer tears and you've got all that sovereignty back and it's more important than food. But yeah, you're a prat, really. Sorry, but that's just something that you've probably been dealing with for most of your life, so it won't come as a shock to hear it from me. And we're into that now. And so there's 3 very, very different energies. The sort of resistance, and then the resignation, and I haven't got a word beginning with R to describe where we are now. Regret, maybe. And that fits both of us, because I regret it, even though I didn't vote for it, just as much as you do, because you did. There it is. Resistance. What was the second one, Keith? I was pleased with that. The 3 R's. It started resistance, something, regret. I can't believe it. No one's paying attention. What's the point of me sitting here talking? All I want is one reminder of one word that I just used, like literally 10 seconds ago. What are you all doing? A crossword? It's incredible. 6 minutes after. What was the second R word I used a minute ago? Text it to 84850. Resistance. Resistance. Oh, flipping heck. I should change the subject completely, shouldn't I? And we will. Here's a story that I first covered in, just checking, 2011. 2011. When a new edition of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain was published, and it had 2 words expunged from it. One was, what I think we could probably all agree, it remains the resignation, resistance, resignation, regret. At least someone's paying attention, even if none of my colleagues are. 7 minutes after 12 is the time. 2 words, including the N word, which is, the most upsetting word or the most controversial word inflammatory is the word I'd use in the English language. And the other was another racial epithet for Indian. And even that, of course, is a nuanced word because it refers in Mark Twain's work to Native Americans, not to people from India. But we first did this in 2011 when this new edition of Huckleberry Finn came out. And there's a special prize today for anyone who, as someone's just pointed out, you can rewind live radio on Global Player. So I could have just done that to work out what it was that I just said. Resignation. Looking at Mark Twain, looking at the repeated incidents in this book, I think I was in favour of it at the time. I think I was. Special prize for anyone who can actually remember. Just to be clear, you can't rewind live radio back that far. You can't rewind live radio back to 2011 to establish precisely what line I took upon the decision by Mark Twain's publishers in the 21st century to replace some of the words that he used in the very, very early 20th century. But Salmon Rushdie joins this debate today. And I don't like being on the other side of arguments from Salmon Rushdie. And that has made me think that we should have a conversation about changing old books. So I would have said to you, probably even an hour ago, I'd have said to you, it was obviously right, and I think I still would say it was right. No, I would. I think it's right to remove the N-word from Huckleberry Finn. I don't see what purpose it serves. They replaced it with the word slave because during that period of American history, they were synonyms, essentially. So I think there is a line. I think there is a line where the case for expunging words from works of literature because values have changed is strong. And that would be the example I would use. But if the line exists, then the debate is about what is on this side of it and what is on that side of it. The debate is not about whether or not the line exists. So you might not think the line should exist. I can't wait to find out what you think about this one, because it's James Bond, of all things, that Salmon Rushdie has turned his attention to while accepting a Freedom to Publish award at the British Book Awards. He sent a video message. He's still recovering from injuries sustained in a knife attack last summer. The freedom to publish, of course, is also the freedom to read, the freedom to write what you want, to be able to choose what you want to read and not have it decided for you externally. And the freedom to publish books that ought to be published and sometimes are difficult to publish because of pressure from this or that group. He picks, in particular, upon Roald Dahl and Ian Fleming. Now, for me, they're 2 quite different propositions. I, unlike Salmon Rushdie, don't see them as being part of the same proposal, because the reason for bowdlerising some of Roald Dahl's work was to... Well, here's the way I understand it, okay? So here's the way I understand it. The reason why an edition of Roald Dahl was published, although Penguin made it pretty clear pretty quickly that they were going to continue to publish the original texts as well, but Dahl is a master at childish unpleasantness, at children being unpleasant to each other, but also at using physical attributes as insults, which when I was at school was perfectly normal. You know, you can tell it was perfectly normal because even after I got this job, I would be, I think, unpleasantly rude about overweight people. I gave them their own quotes hilarious end quotes nickname, and I referred to it often. And I've atoned for that. I've regretted it, and I've explained why I was able to do it on air several times. But it's different now. You know, I know that kids pick on difference and tease, but there's no. Apart from in the pages of the Daily Mail, there's no real pushback against the idea that we should be encouraging children to be nice to each other if someone has special needs. When Jamie Oliver was at school, when him and his mates were taken out for their special needs class, the children used to sing special needs to the tune of Let It Be by the Beatles. Now, I don't think it's done Jamie any particular harm, but there might have been other people who experience, maybe it has actually, but there are other people who experience that kind of thing that it would have done great harm to. So many of us carry childhood, and I'll use the word trauma, albeit that conjures up much bigger images than perhaps I intend. Everybody carries childhood trauma into adulthood. Everybody. The people who are carrying the most childhood trauma into adulthood are often the people who would poo-poo most loudly at the idea that we all carry childhood trauma into adulthood. And that trauma could be something relatively innocuous, like being picked on because your hand-me-down school uniform was 2 sizes too big and everyone called you poor, and you still bear that mark of shame from being singled out for familial poverty at kindergarten. Whether it was true or not, the shame you felt that day is just below the surface of who you are today. And if you're in denial about that, it's part of the reason why you're short-tempered and often find yourself being unable to emotionally connect with the people that you care most about. Everybody carries childhood trauma into adulthood. It's right up there. When I call Digby Pudding Jones, I'm referring to the contents of his head, not to the size of his waist, just to be absolutely clear. Julia has just asked me. Also, I haven't said that for a very long time. He should have got a mention in the last couple of hours, shouldn't he? Of course. So I genuinely believe that. Therefore, I can make quite a strong case for saying that putting out an edition of Roald Dahl that changes some of the ruder abuses for more for more digestible insults is the right thing to do. And then you read that they're doing it to James Bond as well, to take out some of the misogyny and to take out some of the sexism, some of the sex scenes in James Bond were pretty close to coercive. In fact, off the top of my head, I can't do this, but I suspect some of them just were coercive by modern standards, weren't they? The idea that, you know, if I read to you, in fact, I'll find it during the break. If I read to you what it said on the poster of, I think it was the Antony and Cleopatra film that Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor made together, you won't believe your ears when I tell you what it actually said on that poster. So, I want you to tell me, and I want you to give it a bit of thought, but not necessarily loads. We'll use those 3 examples, all right? We'll use the N-word in Huckleberry Finn. We'll use the sex scenes in James Bond. And we'll use the physical attribute bullying in Roald Dahl. Salmon Rushdie says, there is never any case whatsoever for sanitizing literature. Whatever the book, whoever the author, whatever the word, you must always print it and leave it unchanged as the world turns. That would mean children in school today reading Huckleberry Finn with the N-word in it, and a teacher having to explain why it was acceptable then but is not acceptable now. Or you think it's okay. You think it's possibly important. And as you can probably tell from this slightly tortured introduction, I'm a little bit surprised to discover that I honestly don't know what I think. I don't buy into this kind of woke, politically correct propaganda. I think in the case of Roald Dahl, you're doing it in order to discourage children from being horrible to each other. and the books, as they were written, do encourage children to be horrible to each other. And Roald Dahl and I grew up in an era where children being horrible to each other was a lot more acceptable and a lot more unpleasant than it is now. I think that's progress. The James Bond sex scenes, are they going to teach? I mean, we've got so much misogyny around at the moment. Are we really going to blame it on James Bond instead of Andrew Tate? Or would there be an Andrew? I just don't know. I genuinely don't know. I can tell you now that when my introduction is as confused and as tortured as this, it offers you your best opportunity of the week to actually get through. But you've got to have something sensible to say. What do you think about this one? The more you read, I think, the more interested I am in what you have to say. Because quite a lot of stories like this are often dominated in the British media by people who haven't opened a book since 1964. But they're absolutely adamant that the woke mob is coming to ruin our books. And the last one they read was probably by Enid Blyton, who was one of the first authors, of course, to be sanitised or exposed to the woke mob, because some of the stuff she wrote was obviously and absolutely unacceptable, which means there is a line. So there is a line. Which means I finally got to the question at 17 minutes after 12. Where is it? There is a line. So some of the stuff in Enid Blyton you cannot put out. Now, Agatha Christie, the N-word, I think, is the line. Or is proof that the line exists. So where do you put the line? And more broadly, what do you feel? What do you think? Tell me your thoughts on Salmon Rushdie's insistence that you should never change a single line of a single classic book because it should be accepted as products of their time. If I told you I was 52-48 on this, would you know which way I was? Would you? 52-48. Which way do you think I'm going now? No, I've got to the end of the introduction now. I often have a very different position at the end of an introduction than I do at the beginning. That's why I do them. That's why I do them. I'm 52-48. And I might tell you which way I'm going after this, but only after you've told me what you think about the idea that nobody should ever change a single line of a classic book, which, as far as I can tell, for Salmon Rushdie, would include the N-word in Huckleberry Finn. Hit the numbers now, 0345 6060 973, and we'll talk after this. Okay, it wasn't Antony and Cleopatra, it was The Taming of the Shrew, and I found the poster, but I can't read the text because it's so blurry on my screen. This is great radio, this is why they pay me the big bucks. I don't know what I can... Oh, hang on, is that it there? Yeah, I might just be able to... I can't get it, but do I press to make it bigger? Command or Alt? Is it... I can't quite read that. Hang on, I'm just going to move a bit closer to the screen, so I have to move the microphone with me. Let me see if I can... No, I can't read. Can someone get me a magnifying glass or some spectacles or something like that? Or just find me the text of the 1967 Taming of the Shrew movie poster, okay? And we'll get on with the question of whether or not Salmon Rushdie's right and you should never change a single line of a single classic book, regardless of how much morals and mores may have changed in the period between publication and today. Chris is in Tower Hamlets. Chris, what do you reckon?
Good morning, James.
Hello,
Long
Chris.
Time no speak.
Likewise. Obviously. How are you?
Yeah.
Former head teacher, so you come at this from within and without.
No, but more significantly, James, by trade I was an English teacher all my life.
Excellent.
A long time ago, I read Huckleberry Finn with a class, but more recently, like hundreds of teachers, I've taught To Kill a Mockingbird.
Yes.
To students. The N-word, of course, is hugely significant in that book, and it would be a travesty to expunge it.
Oh, that's a point. So you couldn't teach, or you couldn't read it without the N-word being in it, really. It would lose much of its weight, and therefore maybe there is no line. So Huckleberry Finn?
Yeah, I mean, Huckleberry Finn is obviously different because it's
need it. It doesn't add or take away from the plot,
and it's so prevalent in there. But the worry I have is this: let's accept that we are going to make those decisions about works of literature. Who exactly is going to make them?
Yeah.
I mean, who are these people that we're going to set up as moral arbiters?
Yeah. In these cases, it'd be publishers and teachers, I suppose, wouldn't it?
If somebody came to me and said, "Chris, would you like to be one of the people who makes the decision?" I'd absolutely say not. I mean, how can I make decisions like that on behalf of everybody else?
It is, yeah. I mean, I think I was 52-48 disagreeing with Rushdie when I began my introduction. I was 52-48 agreeing with him by the time I got to the end of it. And I think you're nudging me still further in that direction. So the Roald Dahl stuff, they changed enormously fat to just enormous. And they described, instead of describing a woman working as a cashier in a supermarket or typing letters for a businessman, they described her as possibly being a top scientist or running a business.
I trust teachers, James. That's the thing. Good teaching requires a proper dialogue between the teacher and the students. You don't just. I think
you're right. I mean, if you can't teach relativism, then get out of the classroom. Really.
Exactly.
Okay, you're on the list. I don't mean that in a threatening way. I mean that you are your vote, as it were, is registered. But I still feel differently about the N-word in Mark Twain than I do about enormously fat, for example, in Roald Dahl. And that's a good example of what I was talking about. If you're reading a book in which it's okay to call a kid enormously fat, in this case Augustus Gloop, then the message sent to children is that it's okay to call each other enormously fat. And, it isn't really. It used to be. When I was 10 or 11 years old, there was a teacher at my school who would regularly pick upon the bigger lads and give them nicknames based upon their size. I remember it, and no one batted an eyelid. Absolutely normal behaviour. I couldn't tell you how much of that those kids have carried into their adult life, but I can tell you that we all carry childhood trauma into adulthood, and the depth at which we bury it can often be a guide to how big the problem actually is. Luke's in Newquay. Luke, what do you reckon?
Hi, James. I think the most important thing is where the push is coming from to remove the word. In the case of the N-word, if that has come off the back of a campaign from an anti-racism campaign group who say categorically
we don't want
black kids in school should not have to see that word in the book, then I think we should listen to that and say, we agree, let's take it out. But on the other hand, I can imagine an argument going that it's important to leave it in because then it can be used as a teaching aid, like you said in your introduction. It could be a way for some kids to better understand the level of marginalisation and hatred and nastiness that people from that ethnic group faced in that time.
So we've got here really a kind of, we're conjuring up an image of a well-meaning but ultimately slightly over-enthusiastic book cleaner, aren't we? Someone who will remove everything that could possibly be considered even vaguely offensive, which is probably a bit unreasonable.
Yeah.
Versus someone saying, you need to understand that for people like me, this really hurts. This is violence.
Yeah. I think it's how good of a teaching aid it matters too. Removing the description of Augustus Gloop of being really fat or whatever it was. That's not going to help, and it's not going to open any kids' minds to
do you not think so? I wouldn't. I mean, you've also got the Quentin Blake illustrations, which leave nothing to the imagination, and Augustus Gloop's entire role in that book is based upon his propensity for eating his own body weight in sweets on a daily basis, isn't it? I think Rushdie's going to come away with this one, but that doesn't mean we're all right. It might just mean we're all wrong. We're all old. We're all out of touch. We're all failing to move with the times. Thank you, Luke. Shay's in Acton. Shay, what do you think?
I just wanted to say, I listened to a podcast not that long ago called Things Fall Apart.
Yes.
It was on Radio 4. It was incredible because it was talking about the big topics that we have and how people can't agree on them. There was a book that he mentioned called The N-Word. So the title is The N-Word, by an author called Dick Gregory, who was an American civil rights activist. And he was the first black comedian to successfully cross over to white audiences.
Right.
And the title being The N-Word in and of itself is integral to the whole book, and it's used regularly throughout it to basically describe what people would call him in the audience and how he managed to overcome that, and how he managed in that time to actually cross over his comedy to white audiences. And the podcast was about how. So
just to clarify, it's actually called the word for which the N-word is a euphemism.
It's the title of the book is The N-Word.
No, but I have to be completely clear on this. Let me finish saying what I'm saying. The title of the book is the word for which quotes the N-word, end quotes, is a euphemism?
I think so. I mean, I haven't actually read the book. It's on my list.
No, but it isn't. The title of the book isn't the N-word. It's the thing we mean when we say the N-word, right?
Yeah, I see what you mean. I think so, yes. But
well, you don't know. Sorry. I thought that's okay. Right. I thought that's what you were telling me.
But the title, because the title was the N-word, the book was actually banned in America. And
then it was what I'm saying. Sorry. Okay, I think everyone understands where we are now.
Yeah. It was totally banned just on the basis that the word was the title.
Wow.
But people hadn't actually read the book, and they didn't know that it was actually written by a black comedian who was trying to explain how he managed to cross over into white audiences. So they saw the word, and they just said, no, got to ban it. But actually, there was a lot more context.
Well, that wouldn't happen now, though, would it? Not least because of the prevalence of the word itself in popular culture, in hip-hop music and elsewhere. So that probably wouldn't happen now.
I'm not sure. I mean, I think that it was so provocative.
Well, you've got NWA, are a fairly good example of how the word can actually be permissible in popular culture when it's not being used as a pejorative by racists. So
Sure. But it was just super fascinating to me in the podcast that it was put forward as a book that was banned because of the title alone, because the word was there so prominently, and people made a lot of assumptions.
It would have been banned in some places. I think it was...
It was banned from the school list.
Exactly, because it's never been out of print. It's never been out of print since 1964. And it was, I think I chose my words infelicitously, but the title of the book was the word that the N-word is a euphemism for. So everybody knows what I mean by that. So that's a really good point, Shay. There are of course going to be contexts in which it has to be used. If Mark Twain had been a black writer or even a former slave writing about it, then I think there would be nuance here. And yet the position that Salmon Rushdie adopts, I think, is devoid of nuance. I think it is an absolutist position that you never change words at all, which would work, because that would work with both Dick Gregory and with Mark Twain. You don't take the word out of Dick Gregory because you can't. It would render his book meaningless. And you don't take it out of Mark Twain either, because it would dilute the original intentions of the author. Thank you, Shay. Jane's in Epsom. We'll find out what she has to say after the very latest headlines, even with Amelia Cox. It is 12:35. I found it. Thank you, Keith. Keith got me a magnifying glass. I can just about read this poster now, and this is from 1967. This was when Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor appeared together in The Taming of the Shrew. A motion picture for every man who ever gave the back of his hand to his beloved, and for every woman who deserved it, which takes in a lot of people! Exclamation. Just very casual endorsement there of quite serious domestic violence. So the world does change, but no one would suggest removing a scene of domestic violence from a book written in 1967. So how wrong or questionable is it to remove words from books written in different eras, or to change words written in different eras? And the examples I've given you include the N-word in Mark Twain, Roald Dahl's descriptions of, for example, a small child as being enormously fat, and the Ian Fleming stuff as well, which I haven't got the specific examples of, but there are fairly clear examples of James Bond, Ian Fleming's hero, not waiting for consent, as it were, before... well, I don't need to finish that sentence. You know where it leads. 12:36 is the time. Jane's in Epsom. Jane, what do you think?
Hello, James.
Hello, Jane.
I'm a teacher, secondary school, and I've taught about words like this. They pop up, text, media, when we're talking about day-to-day news, as you know, recently. And in a classroom setting, it will always bring shock. There will be literal gasps. Children will react. They will respond. Debates will happen. And I know previous callers have said it's about education and about the teaching.
Yes.
So I've gone from, like you, 48 to 52. I kind of agree with him because it does bring discussion. But then I would question the transfer of that knowledge. So we've got, social media.
Yes.
And your Andrew Tates. We know racist language, but perhaps misogynist language is something that's, more subverted. We've got words that are used in songs and in normal speech between students that have now been reclaimed. I think as long as it's bringing about knowledge and somebody learning and then making a choice, whether that choice is positive or negative, because we're always going to get people who jump on bandwagons.
Aren't we?
I mean, Andrew Tate's been very difficult to teach about in schools.
I can only imagine, actually.
It really is. But I still think having these phrases, these words, and it is more often now it's more phrases or the implication of something.
Yes.
You know, we read about what Suella Braverman's saying. Or,
that's a very good point. She gets asked by a Holocaust survivor to change her language, and she says no. Yes. She refuses.
It's not just about a specific word. It's about what we're saying, how we're saying it, phrasing things. And I think as long as it's bringing about debate and that people understand what they're seeing in a newspaper or online, in a song.
There's another thing. So you're describing context, aren't you? So the context has changed, and in some ways, the reason given for changing things could also be the reason given for not changing things. So
Absolutely.
if you're reading this in a modern context, then you are aware of the fact that these words are not acceptable anymore, and you cannot use them in common parlance. But if you were reading it in 1952, that would not have been the case.
Indeed, I've read all the James Bond books.
Have you?
I have, and although I love them, I also don't like them because of the obvious reasons. However, I can get past that because I really like a good spy story.
Yeah.
But can everyone get past that? Or as you say, people also get very cross when they haven't even read it. So,
well, that's usually the case.
Double the battle.
Yes.
As a teacher, we've got to really go deep into what's written and why it's written and how it's written and what is it people want to say.
That's beautifully put. And oddly, there's some instances of the N-word in Fleming I didn't realise. So that is one of the things that they might change there. I mean, it's a funny one, isn't it? It's why I'm not 100% behind Rushdie, although I'm moving in that direction. But then
I started with you. I started and I thought, no, he's wrong. And then the more I thought about it, I think actually he's possibly a little bit right.
You've got Chris's point.
We've got the education.
Well, that's it. You've got Chris's point as well about who's going to draw the line. If we accept that there is a line, who's actually going to draw the line? And that becomes problematic as well.
Yes, it does. Because I think, I'm a lefty.
Yeah.
I know how I will teach something. I know that I will want people to go away and think of it.
I tell you what, I think we could probably all agree on. I wish the idiots hadn't weaponised the phrase "trigger warning" because that would solve an awful lot of these problems, wouldn't it? If
that's the word we used in education a lot to mark on special needs triggers,
yes.
And it's become so popular now. Yeah. Everyone has triggers. Trigger this, trigger that,
yes.
and actually, it's not. It's about stopping and thinking.
Here's something that you might want a quick heads up about because there is a chance that it could disturb you, and therefore be prepared for the fact that it's on the way, and that would be great. That would help with all of most of the examples that we've given. Although I'm conscious that most of the contributors have been white during this conversation, which puts a slightly different complexion on the N-word conversation. Most, but not all. Thank you, Jane. Kim's in Oxford. Kim, what would you like to say?
Hi, you're the reason why I actually started listening from California. So thank you.
Thank you. You didn't emigrate because of me, I hope.
No. I enjoy my life out there. But
okay.
Real quick, I'm Afro-Caribbean, so if that will help put the nuance on it.
Yes.
I am not against the words, and then let me explain why. Because I would like my children to have boy-girl twins. They're 5-year-old, and I want them to know that this could be words that other people are going to maybe use around them. So I don't want them to not be aware of what's out there, to include maybe the insults that Roald Dahl. As a kid, I grew up in Roald Dahl. This is what I have, and I plan on reading them to them. I have the first editions that I will be giving to my children.
What a treat. We look forward to that.
But the thing is that we have taken the power away from teachers to be able to properly explain why these aren't considered culturally acceptable and why our nuances change across the time by making it so restrictive. And
well, hang on a minute. We literally just spoke to a teacher who was telling us that...
No, not here. Not all.
That's exactly what she does. No one's taken anything away from anybody, Kim.
Maybe I should say in America.
Yeah, okay.
Not here. Okay, let me rephrase that.
Sure.
In America, it's been a little bit more difficult for people to explain the nuances about books and what's going on and why we should say or we shouldn't say that. So let me change that because here it could be completely different.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I want my children to be aware that there are words that could be harmful, but they do appear. So if I can have the conversation as a parent or guardian that, hey, these words do exist out here, be prepared. We don't use those in day-to-day conversations, but they are out in the world.
Yes, and you can only... that has to be handled responsibly, I suppose, but... There's nothing to stop it. There's nothing to stop a child picking up, and then you have to just have hope that the child has someone to turn to in the event that they pick up a book, read something, find it troubling, disturbing, and have an adult or a friend they can talk to about it that will explain what you've just explained. More context. Every call is context, isn't it, on this sort of topic? If it goes well, if it's helpful.
And I want them to be able to turn to me, and that's the reason why I want to have that conversation with me. That way, if someone says, hey, I heard a word that I don't think should be used, I can give them the context of, yes, this should not be used in proper society. However, during the 60s and 70s, and the convoluted times we had in the States, those words were very, very used. Actually, I was called the N-word in public in 2013, and you'd think no one would use that word properly. So,
where were you? Do you mind me asking?
Yes, I was in a shopping centre outside of TK Maxx, and I asked the gentleman, would he mind moving his card so that a pregnant woman, it wasn't for me, in case a pregnant woman had to come in, and he said, why do you care, you N-word? And he used the word fully and loudly, but not knowing where I come from, as I told your producer, she can fill you in the background because I don't want to say what I did.
No, okay.
I just had to tell him where he came from and made him feel bad about it. But I would have felt awful if that had happened to my children and they weren't aware of the word or why it is there.
I hadn't thought of that
angle.
That's a really helpful perspective as well. It is. It's out there, and there's something about some of the quote censorship and quotes conversation that sounds as if you're trying to pretend that it's not out there. And Kim reminds us that it really is out there. It's coming up to 1:45. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. We could have carried that conversation on. We should probably put it in we call it the fridge. We put something in the fridge, which means we can return to it on a day when it doesn't necessarily have to coincide with a news event or a story, as normal people call them, a news story. And there's still a long way to go on that. There's a really interesting conversation. But I'm probably 60-40 now with Salmon Rushdie until someone persuades me that I shouldn't be. But the reason I want to knock it on the head now is because Richard Brooks is in the building of Private Eye magazine, who has been doing some frankly remarkable work on the, how do we phrase it, on the situation in the Northeast. You'll probably be across it. Financial Times have subsequently picked it up, and our very good friend Carol Vorderman has been very, very engaged in all of this. It involves the Teesside, the Mayor of Teesside, Ben Houchen, and some deals. That's all I'll say. I'll let Richard explain the rest. 12:45 is the time. It is 12:49, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. If you read Private Eye magazine, and if you don't, you're an idiot, but if you read Private Eye magazine, you will be familiar with the slow burn of a scandal that often appears first in their pages, and they have been known on occasion to point this out, sometimes years later, usually using the phrase "eyes pass him," and it will be after perhaps a more obvious Fleet Street title gets its knickers in a right old twist about something, and then the editor at Private Eye and the writer will point out, actually, we were across this a couple of years ago. I always try, when my copy arrives, I always try to spot the stories that may be on a slow burn and may actually end up getting picked up more widely, because the quality of investigative journalism in the back of Private Eye, and that's not a figure of speech, that's the name of the section, in the back of Private Eye, is so absurdly high that it puts almost every other corner of Fleet Street to shame. This one's moved a little quicker than normal, because the work that Richard Brooks has done on a redevelopment project in the Northeast has already seen a pretty magisterial account written up in the Financial Times this week. But I was in touch with Richard before the FT, before Jen Williams at the FT got her teeth into this particular story, because I wanted to hear it really in your own words. And what would have drawn a lot of people to this first, Richard, is the Mayor Ben Houchen, the Mayor of Teesside, saying, recently there were also lies propagated by Private Eye who suggested we had sold a, quotes, valuable, end quotes, piece of land for £100. This is untrue. The truth is that a deal with SEAH Wind that will create 2,000 plus jobs will return £40 million plus to the public purse and £7 million per annum for 40 years in business rates. And you replied with a receipt, really, of the land sale from the Land Registry, which was just shy of £100.
Yeah, that's right. Ben Houchen, the mayor up there, also called me the liar in chief. So you've got the main porky pie teller on your show, James. He calls everybody who disagrees with him a liar. But the point here was that this is kind of the latest development in this story, which dates back to the setting up of the South Tees Development Corporation in 2017, when Ben Houchen was also elected regional mayor up there. The idea behind the project was that it would regenerate an area that had been left behind by the closure of the steelworks in 2015. So it was sort of ground zero for the levelling up agenda. In 2019, thanks to the initiative of Rishi Sunak, it was going to become a free port, which it has become. It's become a free port area, which comes with a lot of tax breaks. So it's kind of a focal point for a lot of activist Tory policy in the north of England. And of course, it's politically crucial because it's at the heart of the Red Wall. A lot of this area went Tory, and kind of, I mean, is less so now following some of the local elections, but it's a kind of political hotbed, and it's got this project at the heart of it, which Ben Houchen says is transforming the area, but which, when you look a little bit closer, turns out to be certainly transforming the fortunes of some businessmen up there by gifting them tens, possibly hundreds of millions of pounds.
His refutation of that would hinge upon the idea of we're in partnership and we're all going to make lots of money out of it. What made you start sniffing around on this one, Richard?
It was largely because Rishi Sunak was making such a big deal of it. You'll have seen him in his hard hat and high-vis jacket up on Teesside several times, as you've seen Boris Johnson back in the day, Liz Truss, Kwasi Kwarteng. They've all been up there to kind of burnish their credentials as leveller uppers. And Rishi Sunak in particular has presented this, what's now a free port, as his great Brexit benefit. Whenever he's asked, give us a benefit of Brexit, Rishi Sunak says, well, free ports. Oh, yes. And look at what we're doing on Teesside. So we decided to look at what's going on Teesside. And what you find is a bit of a boondoggle.
And significant sums are already being extracted from the site.
That's right. The project was set up very quietly, secretly really, as a joint venture with some local property developers. There was a 50-50 joint venture company set up, which was to kind of direct the development. And as part of that, it was given options to buy any parcel of land it wanted on the site once the public sector had paid for its remediation. Remember, this was a really toxic old industrial site. Costs a lot of money to put right and make ready for the new green industry which is supposed to be coming there. The Development Corporation has already spent about 250 million quid on remediating the site, and it has certain parcels, or one parcel in particular, ready for occupation by this Korean wind turbine manufacturer. And that parcel of land, it has sold under this option agreement to this company that's now controlled 90% by the businessman for £1 an acre, plus inflation, plus VAT. That came to about 100 quid. The company that the businessman controlled instantly flipped it on and got about 75 million quid for it. So, this was a pretty spectacular deal that we wrote up and exposed a few weeks ago. Ben Houchen responded that this is lies.
Yes.
He says they actually got 15 million.
Right.
Which, the documents, which is belied by the documents. And that's what I posted in response to his accusation of telling lies. He says, this 15 million is another amount. It's not on the paperwork. And I understand that it was done on the side for tax reasons. So, but anyway, it's not a great, it doesn't greatly affect the question that hugely valuable assets have been given away for a very small sum.
And the people making the enormous profits are it's not the public purse. There's sales of scrap metal as well. I think this is something the FT picked up on as well, isn't it? £90 million worth of scrap metal.
Yeah, I mean, scrap doesn't quite do it justice. Some of this stuff is very valuable steel left over. So far, about 90 million quid has officially been recovered on the site, and that's split 50-50 between the Development Corporation and this joint venture company that's 90% owned by the businessman. So they've taken 40-50 million quid from that.
In dividends, direct into these...
Well, they get it into their company, and then in this company they can do what they want with it, and it looks like they've taken it out as dividends from looking at the accounts of one of the business partners.
There are three, really, aren't there, business partners involved in this? Do we know anything about their past dealings with Ben Houchen? I mean, how did he happen upon these three? Because it looks like nice work if you can get it.
Well, that's what we're still working on. The official story is that these are local developers.
Yes.
Chris Musgrave, he does kind of business parks. Martin Corney, he does residential developments. They don't really have a history in industrial sites, but the official story is that in late 2019 they fortuitously acquired a small strip of land on the South Tees, and this scuppered plans for the whole area and gave them great leverage over a compulsory purchase process that the Development Corporation was in the middle of to buy all the land, buy a big chunk of the land. This apparently gave them great leverage, as I say, and in return for surrendering their right to buy this important bit of land, they were given their role in this joint venture arrangement, the role that came with, half the company, options to buy land, and so on. And that's been made even more generous since then by increasing their stake in the company and allowing them to buy land for £1 an acre.
I suppose the question of why Ben Houchen is getting so angry about your coverage has been obliquely answered already. We're kind of out of time. What happens next?
We keep asking the questions. We don't get any answers. I mean, this is the pattern with Ben Houchen.
So he'll come after you on Twitter, but the press office won't respond to your inquiry.
This is the pattern. I say, look, this is what I've found out.
Yeah.
Can you comment on it, please?
Yes.
No response, won't comment. So I write up what we found out, publish it in Private Eye, then he goes online and calls it lies. This is the way to avoid scrutiny. And this is the big point here.
Yes.
What's really needed is scrutiny. Somebody with powers, such as the National Audit Office, to go in, get the information, find out what's really happened. Because at the moment, he's just presenting a very partial picture. He's giving what information he wants to some pliant local journalists, presenting that as the truth, ignoring the actual truth. And that's what we need to get at.
Richard Brooks, many thanks. If you don't already read Private Eye every 2 weeks, then you are, essentially you're walking around with an eye patch on in this country, would be my way of describing
eye patch, a private eye patch.
Yeah, private eye patch, exactly. So take the eye patch off.
Maybe we'll sell one for Christmas.
And get Private Eye instead. Many thanks always. You have been listening to James O'Brien on LBC. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also rewind live radio. You might want to rewind this bit, actually, because it is It is quite complicated, although Richard has made it clearer, as indeed he does in his journalism. You can get the whole show podcast there. That's it from me for today. Tom Sawbrook with you at 4. Sheila Fogarty with you now. 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 4. Sheila Fogarty with